Welcome to Boring Conversations. Today I am honored to have as my guest Michael Chiedoziem Chukwudera, a writer, literary critic, and journalist whose work explores the intersections of literature, history, philosophy, culture, and contemporary African discourse. On a normal day, if you log on to his social media handle, particularly his Facebook, you get to see him talk a whole lot about philosophers from Michael Foucault to Jim Paul Sartre to Albert Camus, constantly posting almost every day to John Steinbeck to Sylvia Plath and to different persons he gets to put snippets of their work in and about that. Michael is the author of Lost is an Aftertaste of Memories, a deeply reflective collection of stories and memories that ordinarily one wants to forget but cannot forget because memories are in and about part of our lives, and one way or the other we cannot almost do without them. He examines different themes in his work from grief tied to the part of the world we both come from, the Igbo tribe that suffered a whole lot last century and continues to suffer at the hands of our current government due to we lacking a sense of detribalization that ordinarily has seen to it that Nigeria is still where Nigeria is. He examines memory, as we've talked about, be it from a communal standpoint to personal life. He also talks about identity with a rich blend of personal storytelling and philosophical inquiries. His literary criticism is sharp and thought provoking. He engages with different themes and with different writers, and you get to see this in the many essays published in different magazines and mainstream journals in the country and out of the country. He engages with both classical and contemporary African literature from the likes of Chinua Achebe to J.P. Clark to Uche Mecheta down to contemporary times in the likes of CNN or in the likes of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie to the likes of emerging and well-established writers in contemporary times from Chico Onigwe to Chinua Ezenwa Ohedo's work and conversations in and about this. You get to see deep within his sense of reasoning and his sense of belonging, a deep-seated appreciation for not just contemporary African literature, but for African literature entirely. And you see him trying to question and tries to deeper into the philosophical undercurrents of storytelling and as it concerns our world today. Beyond literature, Michael is also the founder of the Umofia Literary and Book
Okay,
Festival.
actually, festival.
Yeah, gets to take place once a year at the moment. We hope to see that that gets to increase maybe once, twice in a year or something like that. And we ordinarily, it's a dream and it's a desire that we get to see it get to grow down there. He's also the co-founder of a book club dedicated to fostering a deeper appreciation for books amongst young readers as well as those already who are into reading. And what you get to find here is a sense that at a point in Michael's life, in order for him to get to this book club that gets to take place at their meeting, he has to travel across the Niger. And that ordinarily underscore a deep sense of seriousness as it concerns what he ordinarily believes can get to happen. This morning on Facebook, I saw a comment we will talk about shortly about somebody talking about those who don't read on Bikedy's on Bikedy's handle, and I would like to explore
Yes,
your
yes.
spontaneous reaction as we go as it concerns book reading and all that. But also, Michael's journalistic work critically examines Nigerian society, a thing that every writer ordinarily should get to do because uh, Simone asked the question, what is the job of a writer if ordinarily such a person doesn't reflect the times upon which such a person is existing? He talks about politics, he talks about culture, making him one of the most compelling voices in contemporary African thought. And I say this with no iota of flattery down here. He is what he is what. Just like they will say, Michael is who he thinks he is. His writing is deeply introspective, yet socially engaging, offering fresh perspectives, on the ever evolving African literary and cultural landscape. I look forward to an insightful conversation with Michael. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here. And I'm honored to have been invited to this um, podcast. As I have been following the podcast since it began, the conversations that I've been had here are very, very insightful. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
I really appreciate my brother.
Thank you.
As it concerns the post the post that you interacted with, it was about um Pa Ikedi Roland celebrating Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie as it concerns what we celebrated yesterday, the International Women's Day,
Yeah,
and not just in and about that, talking about the fact that the Half of a Yellow Sun stands as her best work so far, but then you find this guy jumping into, like what you said, a hasty generalization as it concerns what makes for Nigerian readership. You are the co-founder of a book club, and not just that, you've been engaged in a whole lot of events as it concerns readership, literature as the as a discipline entails. What is fueling this idea that we don't have readers in the country? What is fueling this idea of people just almost always saying, in Nigeria there are no readers?
the idea that a lot of people are no longer reading in Nigeria is fueled by, I think, ignorance. A lot of people think that the the world around them and the behavior of the people around them is the mainstream behavior. Their own little side of the world is what reflects the reality of every other space, which is not true. As human beings, we need to understand that our own reality is a tiny fraction of what the general reality is. I don't think people do not. People read. As a matter of fact, people still love reading as much as they used to love it, if not more. But there's an underlying reality behind the reading culture currently,
Okay.
which is that first, the economic situation of the country is very, very distracting. The lives of people are no longer as stable as it used to be. So you get to meet a lot of people who tell you, wow, I used to love reading, or, the hustle and bustle. But also, on the other side, there are still a lot of people who love reading, who have managed to sustain their love for reading. And there are also some people who, in religion, we call it backsliding, who backslided and are coming back into the culture again. And now there's also another reality that books are very expensive now as well. But in between all of this, you see a lot of people who are still trying to look for one way or the other to get to read books. As someone who has been a founder of a book club for 4 years and has is about to run 10 edition of our Arts and Books Festival. It's not true that people are not reading. People love to read, but we also have to understand that reading is a kind of leisurely and a kind of elitist culture that, if it's declining today, and also if it's declining today in society, you don't blame the young people. I see people blaming the young people every time. No, that's ignorance. That's a very bad way to look at it. There is an underlying reality behind why sometimes it seems like people are not able to read. And it's not that they are not reading. A lot of us are reading. And then there's also social media as well, from which a lot of us, some people think social media is just all about news and everything. But a lot of us consume useful content from social media as well. We read and we get informed from social media, which is, which I think, yes, the reading culture is alive. We just need a bit of culture, which is what we are trying to do. A bit of, put a bit, just need to put some of the literary and cultural arts together, to make people gravitate towards reading. I don't think a country where people do not read can have as many writers and as many poets that we have currently. Some of who are even abroad in a country where a country Doris Lessing has this saying that writers do not come from houses where there are no books. So I think writers and poets do not come from countries where people do not read. So yeah,
Of course, you've unpacked a whole lot down here. You've talked about the economic angle, and I get to see this a whole lot. People blame the youth for ordinarily not reading, but there's a saying that, you know, those who came before us planted trees not because they know they will stay under those trees, but because they are planting it for the future generation. I
yeah,
had a conversation with one of my uncles, and he had told me about things like meal tickets in their times when they were still in
yeah,
universities,
yeah,
and even about the fact that they finished and then they contributed in crumbling such structures, and now it's blamed upon we to say, we don't like studying, we don't like going to school, we don't like doing in and about many things that ordinarily they just treat the symptoms, failing to look at the main the main
yes.
issue down here. Your book club, what is it about? Where is it situated? Who are you addressing, and who can be a member to such a book club?
Yeah, the Eagleness Book Club. Um, we hold our meetings in Oka. We've had our meetings in Oka once or twice every month for the past 4 years. The only month we do not hold meetings are January because, after the end of the year event in December, we kind of allow everybody settle into the
Relax.
new year, yeah, before we get back to it. So, anybody who is interested in arts and literature can be a member, you know. But especially, I feel like the people who would benefit more from this people who are very, very interested in the intellectual aspect of literature, who are not just interested, who want a deeper engagement in literature. I started it with my friend Omnemel Suchuku in 2021. We started it because, I mean, I graduated from university at the time for 4 years, and when I returned to Oka, as a writer at the time, we began to discuss about the fact that there are no literary active literary communities that were engaging literature in an innovative and in an inspiring way. And I mean, it wasn't a good look because I mean this is the part of the world that has given the world great writers like Chinua Achebe, Florent Opa, Chilomanda Adichie, even very, very good contemporary writers
The
like
Onitsha literature, it's in and about one
yes,
out of
and
that part of the
Ishiban
world.
Kwesi
It's
like
close. Oka, Onitsha, just like very, very
yeah,
close.
yeah, very, this is the part of the world that has given the Igbo people very good storytellers, which is evident. And was not a good look that there is no good literary culture here. And every now and then we see our writers pop up in international spaces, even global spaces, even which is good. So our people see the buy and you see no multiple apologies. Charity begins at home. That's like the literal translation.
Translation, yeah.
Even though that does not quite capture the
The essence of,
poetry. Yeah.
yeah.
So we decided that we needed to get young writers in the community, and that was how we started. We put out words to university to young people. And we started strong, and we've been going strong since then. So that's basically a small history of how we started. We are open country members who did a profile of our work 2022, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically that's what we are doing. And we read books, we read novels, we read essays, we read short stories. Now we read essays because part of the reason we decided to start reading essays was we realized that as somebody who did not get much of my writerly orientation from the classroom, I mean, I had very wonderful literature teachers in secondary school, but I studied biology in the university. I actually got my literary orientation from reading on my own, reading words, and there was this booming literary culture on Facebook then. I realized that I had more exposure than even people who studied English language. And it was a result of the curriculum, the kind of curriculum with, to which these students are treated to in the universities. Now, these curriculums can sometimes be box. They can sometimes put the students in the box, and sometimes they can be also very boring. I see a lot of students who go into the university with love for reading and come out with that love no longer there because perhaps they are forced to engage in the arts and the literature in a way that is not totally enriching to their cycle, in a way that does not favor the current in which they are their quest for knowledge, in which their quest to engage the arts, flows. So we notice that a lot of these people begin to think that literature is boring because of the university system. And Nnamdi Azikiwe University, particularly, does not have a very good English department. They don't have any. They have very very few good teachers there, if I am not mistaken. And we decided that we needed to use this book club as an avenue to expose people to the riches of literature. And part of the ways to do that is reading literary essays. Sometimes academic essays are good as well, but sometimes academic essays, there's this problem with the academia. Often it seems as if the academics are in a cocoon talking to each other. It seems sometimes the language of their writings are not fully accessible. Or many academics are bad writers, they are knowledgeable. So we needed to bring the students to a space where they could read literary essays with literary quality. And in beginning to compare literary perspectives with academic perspectives, they become riches. I think they become riches in the way we learn because in order to be more knowledgeable, one has to seek knowledge from different points of view. So we began some of the first essays we read at the time were Chinua Achebe's essays about Conrad, an image of
Okay.
Africa, racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And then we read Paikide's essay about coming to America, where he
Yeah,
wrote
yeah,
about,
yeah, yeah.
where he wrote about the university here. He did his master's. And it was quite fascinating the way students responded to this. And we began we planned towards writers workshop. We hold writers retreats. We don't call it writers workshop. We hold writers retreat once or twice every year, also as a way of sharing knowledge. We don't necessarily believe, of course, some aspects of writing can be taught, but the most important way to learn is to write and to be put in an environment where sometimes you can exchange ideas with other writers. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's part of what we do. These are part how we started before Illinois Festival came to be 2 years ago.
It that's a very wonderful outlook there, particularly the aces. Many persons just think of for someone like Chinua Achebe, many persons just think about Chinua Achebe and then they talk about things fall apart and then that's almost in and about it. Some persons don't even proceed to the complete African trilogy and they're just like, oh, maybe just things fall apart and then if they want to extend a little bit, maybe a man of the people or maybe the 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 book that stands out a whole lot, Arrow of Gods, and
Yeah,
in and about that, the end there, and that's in and about it. But they don't look at ant hills of the savannah. They don't look at girls at war. They don't look at home and impediment. They don't look at the education of the British protected child, which happened to be his last collection of essays before he released There Was a Country, and then eventually went to meet went to join our ancestors. It's quite an interesting look out there. And for those who have not looked at every other thing concerning Chinua Achebe, it's a call to get to look
yeah,
at his essays. You find him in his essays, and many persons also don't also know about his poems. They don't
uh-huh,
know him from the side of him being the poet. And I think in the first collection of poems he gathered after the war, in the introduction, he had talked about the fact that he had moved from writing novels because at that point he needed to be on the move and he needed to summarize things as he shifted from one place to the other, working in the Directorate of Manpower during the war, and also
yeah.
being a kind of an ambassador for the Biafra cause in and about this. And there are poems that ordinarily stand so well for me, like the one talking about the mango seedling, the
That's a fantastic poem.
Yeah, talking about that was like very, very beautifully captured, and it just
So,
takes you like to the particular location, and you are trying to stay on the staircase, and you are looking at probably the mango seedling he was trying to talk about, or the Madonna and child. The idea of
mm,
the
yeah,
combing hairs that were falling off already, and
yeah,
he said something towards the end that on a normal day this would have been a daily act of love towards the woman, but now it's like she's doing it hopelessly. Yeah, yeah, with sagging breasts that ordinarily cannot even breastfeed the baby again. It begins to tell you that something that happened in this part of the world that ordinarily, has changed the psyche of this man who ordinarily used to hope for Nigeria so much, and all of a sudden, in less than 5 years, in less than 6 years of him getting married to Christy, the war broke out and everything scattered. I think the picture trended recently also of his wedding with Christian. It got captured also in different places. About Paikedi, I know he gave a wonderful review of your book and also contributed to the blog. I think he was also he has also been instrumental in a whole lot of things happening in the Nigerian literary space. And Nigerian literary space, I mean, pro democracy days, in and about his involvement and engagement in the movement that ordinarily saw to Nigeria becoming what Nigeria is. And for the longest time I've come to exist in my life, I've come to appreciate what Pa has done and what he's doing. His blog is on its own level. It's just like a testament that says, okay, in and about from the very first essay he posted in the early 2010s and up until when he stopped writing down in that particular blog, that's like a collection or like one bearing witness ordinarily to what ordinarily can happen. How did you come about Pa and what, you know, gravitated you towards his line of writing and the line of thinking?
the early 2010s, I was in university at the time. I was in science class, not yet a writer, but I had this literary consciousness I grew up with. So part of the reading I used to do then, I used to Google a lot of things. And often I would Google, I think that was when Chinua Achebe's, there was a country I
There
was
was a
come,
country
yeah,
got
had come up
published,
at
yeah.
the time. And
I think
I
that's
was,
2011.
yeah, yeah, it came out at, well, 2011, 2012. But
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
was, but I was Googling it, I was reading about it around 2013, 2014,
Okay.
So yeah, I Googled some, I was reading up about Chinua Achebe and I saw this particular conversation about being the father of African literature. There was this essay I read, I think Neil Sundari, who of course is
Okay.
another poet who was very
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
inspiring for me, had challenged the notion that Achebe was the father of African literature. And I think there was a response or so that Paikide had written about, Neil Sundari. It was irreverent it was irreverent in its usual way. I can't really remember all the particular details, but I also remember that there were a few book reviews that I read at the time, you know, and I didn't realize until much later, I think until 3 years later in 2016, when I discovered Paikide on Facebook, that some of these essays I'd been reading then, this was the particular writer that was behind them, because I started actively reading his blog and then I started coming across some essays that I have read before. I admired him at the time because he seemed to be this very larger than life human being who a lot of young writers gravitate towards, And he didn't seem controversial to me at all in 2016. It was much later when I began, because I didn't get into the literary space on Facebook until late 2015, early 2016. So it wasn't until much later until I began to interact with many other writers, and I went for a K festival in 2016, and Buhari had just become president at the time. So I wasn't around when the big arguments happened between writers on Facebook. So it was in the furtherance of the argument when it became clear that this president that was sold to Nigeria by part of the Nigerian intellectuals, unquote, as a reform Democrat was a disaster. It was then that I began to know what was happening between Paikide and some of the writers in the literary scene, and the fact that he had even stopped becoming friends with many of them, after I think after that incident, because of how hard he went on his conviction that Buhari would never be good. So that was my introduction to his personality and much of what he was. So his friend release was full at the time. But yeah, somehow we became friends after some time on Facebook, and he would share some of the things I wrote. The first piece he shared that I wrote was the criticism I wrote about Nick Awolu's documentary on Florawapa. You know, Meanwhile, shout out to Nick Awolu. We have our disagreements, but
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
our disagreements, but I still see him as a friend and as a brother to some
Man and his
extent.
cheat, they
Yeah,
are
yeah,
moving
he's
the way
not.
they are
Yeah,
moving. Like
yeah,
he's in his own realm. Like
yeah, yes. He has a lot of controversies, but I think he's somebody who's deeply passionate about the literary arts in a way that is commendable. So I did not like Onyeka Nwelu's documentary on Floranwapa so much. I felt like Onyeka Nwelu put himself too much in the documentary. He should have
based on the
been
family's
more. Yeah,
ties.
yes. And I wrote a review on it. And Paikide loved the review and shared it. I was beside myself at the time. So I think that was like the beginning. That was the beginning of what would become like what I hope is a lifelong relationship.
Father and
Because
son,
it's like
brothers,
a father
kind
and
of, you know
son
about
kind of
everything.
relationship because we have a lot of conversation about the scene on Facebook at the time was much more literary and robust than it is today. So because I had not been on Facebook at the time when the Buhari, the big Buhari conversation was big among
Yeah,
writers,
yeah.
those who supported him and those who didn't support. I didn't necessarily know what was going on between or what had gone on between him and some writers. It was later on, as time went on, that especially when Buhari, this president who had been sold by some Nigerian writers as the Reform Democrats. When it began to be evident that this was a disaster and the conversation started coming up again, that was when I realized, okay, this was where Paikide now stood with a lot of the literary community. And yeah, so we became friends at some point on Facebook. So one day he shared a piece that I wrote, Onyeka a review of Onyeka documentary of Florent Wapa. Like I said,
Yeah.
greetings to my brother Onyeka. He's controversial, but he does a lot for the literary community, and I respect what he does. But I did not like that documentary, and I reviewed it as such. I was very honest, and I was of the opinion that Onyeka shouldn't have put himself so much at the spotlight. He should have kind of, a documentary. A person who is behind the documentary is usually at the background. So Paikide liked the review, he shared it, and I was beside myself with joy at the time because I admired him so much. And that was the beginning of what I hope, like what is like a
A
lifelong
father and
relationship.
son relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, a kind of father and son relationship. So we usually we communicate we communicate fairly constantly, more like from time to time we are always almost always in touch, and we have very open conversations with each other, and he has been of very good assistant, the kind of assistant that you hope somebody would be of to you as a young writer coming up and
Even though
struggling.
himself is still very young, he's 29 years
Yeah,
old.
yeah. Well, so yeah. That is yeah. And for me, I think one of the most important critic of that generation. I am not very happy that he has refused to write a book, or even at the very least bring some of those essays together and make them a book or something. I'm not very happy about that. But at the end of the day, his importance in the scene cannot be overlooked. And think that the literary world will continue to remember that impact from time to time. One of the big lessons I've learned from having somebody like Paikide in the scene is the immense importance of people that can hold others accountable, the immense importance of accountability, the immense importance of honesty, you know, honesty about the literary scene, because in the literary scene, the honesty seems to be something that is in short supply. We read books. Yeah, there are good books, but there are also some books that are not very good, and we need to be honest about them, because if there's no good criticism, how does art flourish in a good sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it- some of the reviews by Kide wrote was really instrumental in pointing out to me the extent to which one can read and understand novels. I remember 7 years ago when I used to read his review, and in some of the reviews, he would say something like, "This book could have been better edited," and I would often wonder. I mean, how could somebody realize that a book is not, you know, well, until much later on when I began to read, I began to notice some of these, maybe structural problems, language flaws, and everything as well. So yeah, it's that kind of influence, very, very, very immense and very, very large-hearted, not just as a writer but as a human being as well.
Sure. One day we'll have a chance to talk about, Pa, not when he's dead, as many persons always leave things to,
Yes,
very
yes,
much when he's alive, and
yeah,
we get to look at things and ties in which he gets to flow, and how he gets to write what he gets to write. And many persons also are like almost scared of critics doing ordinarily what they ordinarily are supposed to do. In
yeah,
conversations with Ugochukwu and Nadia, I also asked him this question as it concerns how things ordinarily should be done, and who critics ordinarily should be, and how they are perceived in society. It's almost like seen as though one is a failed writer, so one chooses to become a critic. But in and
yeah,
about that, that is not really the case, right? And to point out the idea of academics being ordinarily, generally bad writers is
yes,
something you see someone like Chimamanda get to also talk about the academia being a kind of very boring. You also see someone like Chika Chiemeze in some conversations I've had with
Achebe,
uh,
yeah,
yeah, Chika Chimeze, rather, conversation I've had with him. You get to see him talk about the fact that the thing we had this conversation like 2 3 weeks ago, and he was talking about the fact that you can be you can be an academic and still have the capacity of writing good essays. It doesn't mean because you're an academic you are destined to now give us very very boring, sad,
yes,
depressing essays and full of jargons that ordinarily don't make sense to the human person. And if you're going through the writing requirement for the republic, you get to see them in the different the criteria stated down there. They said you should be able to talk about professional academic discipline and conversations to the understanding of an average reader as well as an avid reader down there. And you also happen to be a critic down here. And it was from your literary criticism that we first saw you shine, from conversations in and about Afro critique and conversations with music, talking about the likes of Somto, talking about the likes of Anya Fulugo and different persons down there. And for those who don't know Anya Fulugo, it's like Anthony Obumneme as he used to be, and now the way he has ordinarily, how will I say it,
evolve
um,
and
evolved
transition or
to, yeah,
transition,
transition
transition.
to ordinarily what he currently is a thing that to me is very very remarkable for somebody to sit down within himself and say, this is what I want to do. And you see this also in Nze Tobe Osigwe's
Oh,
transitioning and saying, against all odds, I think this is what I want to do. This is what I should stand for. Against the backdrop of my previous life, I think I am charting a new course and there's something pushing me and I should be able to do that. You also have been a critic, or you are still a critic, though now you are now juggling between
yeah.
being a poet, being a literary critic, as well as being a novelist. So, how have you been perceived from the from your literary criticism? Have you been perceived from a very good light? Have you danced around or in the gallery for people's, how will I say, people pleasing, or you're doing the work of a critic?
Well, I, you know, I grew up in a household where, in a kind of Christian family, and you know, in religion, there's this thing about reverence in religion. One cannot be truly religious if if you not do not revere the object of your worship, or you know follow the doctrines. So, but there was something that was quite striking to me in my childhood. My father criticized gospel music a lot. Sometimes from the message to the context, he often felt like some of these musicians are singing nonsense. This is not the way to praise God, and this is not, you know. And that did a lot to me, my mind as a child. I think it was one of the things that brought out that drove home the fact to me that you can criticize anything. You just need to think about it and look at it and, you know, air your opinion. It doesn't mean that you are being disrespectful or you are being sacrilegious. So that was part of what began my, the aspect of my personality that likes to look at things from a critical lens. So while becoming a writer, I used to think often. I noticed, even though I didn't really know why at the time, I noticed that there are some particular group of writers and their writing that are often discussed and written about than others. You know, and I often used to wonder why. Because if used to read different books. I used to read books on psychology, romance novels, literary novels, and I felt like, yeah, indeed, they are everything, every book that has something sensible to say can be talked about. But why is it that certain topics are given more credence and more attention than others? I didn't get any straightforward answer, but in my evolution as a writer, I began to understand that, I began to see the need, and especially because I began my reading towards becoming a literary writer by reading the African Writers series, as many of them as I could lay hands on. And I noticed a pattern. I noticed there was this socio-political and cultural consciousness that was very much adept in the literature at the time than a lot of what is in the contemporary literature. That was what began my criticism. I felt like these things that were being talked about then, they still matter now, even more now than they did at the time. So why is
Yeah.
it as if writers now are no longer paying attention to it? It was what began my literary criticism. And sometimes writers are fond of telling us critiques that you people want us to write like the Achebe generation. They want us to no, not necessarily. I don't think that is the case. But also, I think the truth is the literature at the time had more impact on society than it currently does. And critiques, the work of a critique is to point certain things out that everybody might not be very comfortable in talking about. There are certain things in society that people do not want to talk about. People prefer to gloss over it and ignore it. When you begin to talk about these things, you become a critic. And I feel like it's not just in Nigeria. Maybe the Nigerian situation is particularly rabid, but all over the world, I think critics are looked upon suspiciously. Critics are looked upon by an even critical eye, because a lot of people want to ask you, who do you think you are to tell us what our, you know, who do you think you are to tell us how to write, but also it's more than that, right? It's more than that. Achebe has the saying that you can't tell a writer how to write. Of course, you can't tell a writer how to write, but it is morally, it is, it's not morally good to side with with power against the powerless. You understand? It's a moral decision not to side with power against the powerless. So now
Mhm.
it's I realized that writers from a very early age, I always knew that writers were very important to society. I mean, if you did not grow up with people who always talked about um, books like Joys of Motherhood, I mean, books like Kenneth Conda's Zambia Shall Be Free,
Mhm.
books like maybe in my case, Arrow of God. I mean, if you grow, most of us grew up around people who always talked about the influences that these books made on them, and we had that consciousness that this is what writers can be to society. I've always wanted my generation of writers to have a bit of that kind of impact. And writers
Mhm.
cannot have that kind of impact if they are not engaging properly with the society. You get?
Sure.
I think that this is the kind of mentality the critics have had that, which determines the kind of topics they give their attention to, the kind of writing they give their attention to, which in some sort of way determines what is literary and general fiction. You get? So as a critic, I've always tried to, write about what interests me, what piques my curiosity, what I feel like people should know about in literature, in music, in film. And the perception is always twofold. There are people who have a lot of kind words to say. I appreciate that. There are people who have criticisms too. When it is constructive, you get to learn a thing or two. I appreciate that as well. And then there are some people who are outright dismissive. No word. We don't need to have I have no words to say about such group of people. But I think criticism is very important. Michel Foucault has this saying that it is the critic's responsibility to tell society where it is headed by virtue of its actions and inactions.
Yeah.
That. And as for being, as for having being known in the literary world on account of my criticism more, it's because that was the aspect of my writing that was ready to be put out to the world at the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think most people who knew me earlier knew me as a poet, started with poetry, but one begins to do some soul searching, some self searching, and you realize that, you know perhaps one genre of writing does is not able to do everything that I want to do as a writer. And that is how the hunger for you know the hunger to writing or working or other genres begins. So I've been writing poetry, I've been writing prose for a very long time as well. It's just that, of course, you have to wait for the right time
Yeah.
for the world to see what has been going on behind the scene.
That is quite an interesting look out there. You've been able to espouse about the conversations and the interactions you've had with yourself and the coming of age of the way you ordinarily get to look at things. For one who has been following you for quite some time, you at least many persons also are big fans of what has come out of the Russian world, the Russian literature, and the persons that have been born in and about of there, from the likes of Leo to the likes of Dostoevsky to the likes of the different names you can get to look, and you also get to see strong ties of existentialism down there. If you can walk us through a bit in and about I don't want to say, I have what I think might be the best Russian literature you've talked about. That would be Anna. But I don't know if that's your best so far at the moment, because the time you talked about Anna was like 2, 3 years ago. There was a conversation in and about Russian literature online, and you gave great insight as it concerns the relationship between Anna and how Leo was able to juxtapose that with Constantine, and in and about that. It looked as if the book was about Anna, but then if you look at the central theme, you get to see Constantine coming to full light there. I don't want to I don't want you to talk about Anna if that's not your best shot down there, but What impression do you have of these guys? And because we're talking about involvement of writers as a concerned society, and you see them bring the Russian war to bear. They put it in and about open, and then they have conversations in and about it. And they wrote about this not in the best of times. They wrote about this during dictatorship periods of
Spanish,
Russian
Spanish.
uprising and different problems here.
All right. Yeah. I always, I've said a few times, maybe not in the public eye that, my discovery of Leo Tolstoy was like, you would compare in the literary, my discovery of Leo Tolstoy in the literary context is could be compared to how a born again Christian discovers Jesus, discovers the gospel of Christ, maybe something like Sermon on the Mount, or
Yeah,
perhaps, the story of the adulterous woman, those kind of powerful, very powerful, moving passages. So in 2016, I was reading Gandhi's autobiography,
with
and
truth.
yeah,
His experiment with truth.
my experiment with truth. Thank you very
Truth, yeah,
much.
yeah,
Yeah, so he made a statement about Leo Tolstoy. I think he was talking about something about the Eiffel Tower and some of these
yeah,
very
yeah,
expensive monuments in Europe. And he made a statement to how Leo Tolstoy usually, would refer to such monuments as wastage of resources and something like the shame of human civilization. But more especially, it was like the focal point between Gandhi's philosophy, Henry David Thoreau, and Leo
mhm,
Tolstoy, which piqued my interest, and Martin Luther King, if you could add a fourth person. I think it was it was either Tolstoy or Thoreau that came about the philosophy of non-violent resistance. I think the resistance of non-violence, and if you remember, that had a very very profound impact on Gandhi.
yeah.
It had a very profound impact on Gandhi and later on Martin Luther King
Martin
as
Luther
well.
King, yeah,
So yeah, so the way Tolstoy was talked about in the book led me to googling him, and when I googled him, what I saw blew me off. Especially because the first book I got introduced to was his collection of essays, "The Kingdom of God is Within You."
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but then I saw that I saw Tolstoy and his two books, War and Peace, his most popular books, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, being talked about as perhaps the two of the best novels ever in literature. Some sources will just flat, outrightly tell you they are the best. And I saw a lot of fantastic writers who too saying these things. And I started reading The Kingdom of God is Within You in 2016, and that was how my journey to reading Tolstoy began. So, but I got Anna Karenina. I got War and Peace. I think I got War and Peace in 2017, and Anna Karenina the year afterwards. And the thing about Russian literature is that there's this saying that in a piece of Russian literature contains everything. You know, contains everything. I mean, everything that can happen in a human life happens in a piece of
yeah.
Russian literature. You know, when you read Tolstoy, you read Dostoevsky. These writers
Lovely.
articulate the human condition in a way that is, in a way that is profound, as well as in a way that it leaves a scar in the mind. It bears
Of
a
course.
profound. And reading Anna Karenina or the Brothers Karamazov in these times is like a rite of passage.
Yeah.
It's like a rite of passage because the books are so big and there are characters that will touch you as well as piss you off.
Just
So,
like in the
and-
sorry, just
yeah,
like in Dostoevsky's The Brothers, you get to
yeah.
see you get to see the judgment of God.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You get to see different characters like Ivanov, who was the intellectual,
Yeah.
Alyosha, who was like the spiritual one. Then I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I think that their father was a wealthy but very senseless and wicked man. And then there's this other brother who's like born out of wedlock, but he's nobody quite knows whether he's sensible or he doesn't know what he's saying. And in each of these characters, the human condition is
Pressure
explored.
is clearly, yeah,
Yeah.
looked
Anna
at.
Karen, yeah, meanwhile, two stories Anna Karenina, yeah, I was all over social media talking about the book at some point because it did, there's this tendency for a book to be hyped and sold to you as the best thing after, the best thing after sliced bread, the way we say it in Nigeria. And you get to read it, and sometimes you're, wow, is this what they were talking about? But Tolstoy's Anna Karenina was everything they said it was for me, because I met so many characters there, and I saw very, very more profound ways of examining human beings than I'd ever seen in literature before. And there's this saying that you read Anna Karenina and you become a better human being because you learn to judge people less and
Yeah,
understand
yeah,
them more. I think he had that impact in me. And funny enough, my favorite character in the book was Anna's husband, the man whom she left, Alexander Karenin.
yeah,
It,
yeah.
it was one of the first places I saw myself in a character, because, there was this profound loneliness that he suffered, in the sense that he was a loving husband. He was doing everything in the best possible way that he could do. But yet he suffered rejection. He suffered, and there was this particular passage, about giving giving so much of the love that he has in himself, and yet it appears that nobody wanted, or
To
nobody
receive the love.
to receive that love. It touched me a lot. Looking back at my life now, I can't really pinpoint what was going on with me that made me feel,
Was it a
I
kind
can't.
of love? Was it a kind of personal love experience,
Well,
or
maybe teenage romance, failed teenage romance love. I don't know, but he had this very profound impact on me. And it's a book about, it's you could classify it as adultery literature. Books like Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, Gustave Flaubert's Emma Bovary,
yeah?
um, Graham Greene's The End of the Affair. They are like classics in adultery literature. But this book goes beyond just that. It explores everything. It brings, and then there's the character of Lenin.
Yeah,
Lenin,
yeah, yeah.
who eventually gets married to the love of his life, the girl who turned him down before. And you know, I think for one of the profound things that has been said about Tolstoy's work is that he teaches you how to understand the psychology of characters, how to explore
Mhm.
the psychology of your character, and how to lay it bare on the page. you know, Neither showing too much nor telling too much, but in such a way that it has a profound impact on the reader. And I think Isaac Babel also has this saying that so Isaac Babel has this saying that if life could write, it would write like Tolstoy.
Yeah,
So I really do think he's very, very descriptive, the descriptions as well as the intellect.
yeah.
In One Piece, there was a passage where Tolstoy used the Newton's law of universal gravitation as a
Hmm.
metaphor to describe, something that was going on. It was a whole other level of writing for me, where
And you get to see the characters get to take the center stage as the books get to move. So
yeah,
it's like a collection of people's life summed up into one, and then each of these characters in one piece get to take the center stage and tell their own story, and they're the ones like
exactly. And
subsets
yeah,
of writing in the first person singular and in and
yes,
about that type of stuff.
yeah, One Piece had over 500 characters, but each of the characters are well given attention, proper attention, which is
Yeah.
something I'm still trying to like do with my fiction, or trying to, I feel like that's part of the reason why the classics, for a writer to improve, one has to read, among many other things, the classics, because they kind of show you what is possible, what has been
Yeah.
done. So now you have an idea of what to aspire to, you know, in depending on how much quality you aspire for your writing to. You know,
Mhm.
Tolstoy did that for me in terms of the orderliness of your writing. He has that, and but Dostoevsky, on the other hand, had more ideas. I think Dostoevsky was more a writer of ideas. He had the ideas, but his writing was more chaotic. Funny enough, some very good writers have described Dostoevsky as not a very good writer, but he's definitely the more. I think in some ways you could say he was the more
Existentialist minded, like
yeah, philosopher. He was. but also I maybe because I've not read his work in the original work in Russia in which it is written, but I really did enjoy the Brothers Karamazov. It's
Yeah,
also
yeah,
very big. It's like a 900-page novel, but it made a very profound impact on me. And Dostoevsky is the patron saint of content over style. But then you can't. I don't believe in saying that a writer does not have style. I don't believe you can label a writer as one who does not have style,
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
one of my favorite essays on the topic of style is Susan Sontag's on style. Yeah, Susan Sontag's on style. So
yeah,
she
yeah.
she made an argument in that essay that one cannot differentiate between the content of a story and the style. The way a story is being told is what is the style, and what is being told in the story is the content as well. So Dostoevsky was the free-hearted, disobedient and dissident writer, and fortunately enough for him, he had all the ideas, he had all the intellect, and he lived the kind of life that, was troubled as well as it was inspired and it was moved, to write those stories. And I think part of the reasons why his life changed was because he was always almost executed. He was almost
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to the gulag, and it was just few minutes to being executed. The message came that they had been pardoned. There's even a story that one of the persons on that death row ran mad.
Went mad.
Yeah, went mad. So yeah, I think Dostoevsky's life offers a very rich, and his works offer a very rich spiritual insight. Or so does Tolstoy. One reads Tolstoy to know how to become a better writer, and also one is educated in the process. And then one reads Dostoevsky to get the ideas and to understand the human condition. You know, both writers are
It's
very fantastic. I also intend to. I've not. Go, I also. I've also read a bit of Ivan Turgenev, but not as much. To make a
Tolstoy
comprehensive.
and Dostoevsky.
Yes, yes,
It's so fascinating how somebody who experienced so much pain in his life, and I'm talking about Dostoevsky now, could come up with the idea of you saying beauty would save the world. And the first time I fell upon such a quote, I was like, what was he talking about? And then you look at his life, you look at the things he was grappling with. For me, I see the underground notes and the man speaking there as Dostoevsky himself, just the same way I see Kafka in the metamorphosis and conversations in and about that. It's like, I am a sick man. I am a depraved man. He's using the first person singular, and the chapters are very short and they're very, very catchy and they're straight to the point as to what society is and in and about that. And yeah, we've talked about Susan, this is Sotong, and her style of writing and her own word in and about how ordinarily she gets to do that. And for our listeners, I would want them to check the Paris Review's interview with her and how beautifully well and how artistically minded she was in talking
yeah,
about ordinarily what should be and what ordinarily should make up for writing in and about that kind of conversation. Back home a little bit, you see the likes of the conversations that get to talk about the different conversations we get to live in. I think that me and you share so much in common is the idea that there was a war that was brought upon our own people from outside. So it was like something we ordinarily, if we were there ordinarily, would want to avoid at all costs, because wars, nobody really wins a war, so to say. I don't
yeah,
believe in the whole idea of the victor and the vanquished, right? Because Chisom will get to tell Chisom Okafor, get to talk about the whole idea of you even saying no victor, no vanquished is already saying there's already a victor, there's already a vanquished at a particular point. But we see the Nigerian Biafra War that many persons want to call the Nigerian Civil War, which was not the case. It was a war between two countries, and in and about this, we get to look at things from different perspectives. It remains a defining moment in Nigerian history. How do you think its memory continues to shape not just Nigerian literature, because we've had a whole lot born out of there? Buchie Mecheta has written, her own part. Elechi Amadi gave us articles that talked about this. You find in recent times, you find Obioma Chigozie, someone you believe gets to needs to do more in terms of how he gets to put his writing and how he ordinarily can get to frame his work and not give us almost too much and leave us with little sense of imagination as it concerns that. You find, and then Chimamanda has given us her own account down there. Akpan Uwem has given us New York, My Village, and that's talking about the more cross riverian or the more minor. It was much more focused on the minorities as opposed to the Biafran story as it concerns
For
the
me,
the whole
yeah,
account thereof. How should we tackle this particular stuff? Because I believe it's something we must look at. I believe it's something we should look at. In conversation with DK Chukwumerije, you find him talking about the idea that we must really look at the war. How is it affecting us today as a people, and what should we do?
yeah, the Biafran War, the piece of history that is the Biafran genocide that is, more or less documented now as the Nigeria Biafra War, has been a very, very important aspect of my coming of age and my coming to consciousness as a writer and as a thinker. So for me, growing up, we always heard about the war and everything. And I think in Benin then, me and my father used to watch. Funny enough, things are very different now. It's funny how things can be different now from how they were 18 years ago. We used to watch a documentary on, I think, NTA. NTA aired the Biafran War documentary for a whole month. Of course, I don't really know, I can't really remember so much and the kind of perspective that documentary
Hmm.
was, took. But at the end of the day, when I look at it from today's perspective in 2025, it's very, very, it's almost impossible or almost unimaginable now for a Nigerian TV station to air anything about
About
the
the
war.
war.
So there was always this consciousness that we had that our people lost so much from the war, and assuming that war had not happened, we could have been much better. And I'm assuming it didn't happen is from two different perspectives. Assuming Nigeria had continued on a certain path of, the Nigeria was going on a certain path of progress in the 1960s, even though there was a lot of corruption.
Yeah.
Assuming somehow things had been managed in a way that there was peace, or assuming Biafra had been allowed to, Biafra was allowed to be, there is this sense that things would have been far much better than it is now, not just for us, but for our neighbors, because there would have been a situation of healthy competition between and perhaps healthier politics. So, but I started reading more and getting to know more about the war in my university years, the books I read. But the first book I read about the war then was in my teenage age anyway. I thought it was Ship and Equencies Divided We Stand. It
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
novel, I read it, and but the books that really made the impression on me that I read were Chinua Achebe's There Was a Country, Alexander Madiebo's Nigerian Revolution and the Biafran War, which
Sure.
which I believe is one of the most detailed accounts
Account of what happened.
of what happened. Um, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Half of a Yellow Sun, which is a magisterial work of fiction, if I might say so. So, and then at some point, I also read David Barnes' Airlift to Biafra.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also read, I read Chukwemeka Ike's Sunset.
I don't. Yeah.
Was that Sunset at Dawn?
Yeah.
And I think I also read Father Ezeani's in Biafra
Uh,
Africa Died.
yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
this all of these books have one thing in common. They leave you with a profound sense of loss. And for me, as an Igbo person, it leaves me with a deep sense that there have been a lot various missteps in history by which has resulted in a situation that we cannot really go forward again until we go back and retrace some of these steps.
Mhm.
When you look at Nigeria today, Nigeria, the Biafran story, the Biafran genocide and what it resulted in. is something that the country is still trying to run away from, or still trying, kind of living in denial, so to say. You know, 3 million children, 3 million children died of starvation during the war. There was an unfair genocide. War crimes were committed by Obafemi Awolowo and um, Obafemi Awolowo, General Gowon, and Chief Michael Enahoro, who were like the mastermind of the blockade. And at the end of the war, Gowon came up with this no victory,
You
no
get no
vanquished.
vanquish kind of stuff.
But yeah, but you know, a lot has been said about that, but that is not even the most important thing. The most important thing was that he promised the 3 R's: the reconciliation, the rehabilitation, and the reconstruction of the Southeast. And this is 55 years after the war supposedly ended. No such thing has been done. You come to the Southeast. I've lived in the Southeast for more than half of my life. I grew up in Benin, spent my teenage, we left Benin when I was about 14. Almost, I'm almost 30 now, but I've been in the Southeast for more than half of my life. And I can
Yeah,
tell you that the reality that we see here is that the war has not ended. The war is still being fought psychologically and politically. And it's not just about the who holds which political position. I don't necessarily believe in all of that, because I believe those political minister, who is president, mainly favors a select group of the elites more than it favors the ordinary people. But the most important way in which the Southeast is being marginalized is the systemic obstruction of infrastructural development in the Southeast. A lot has been said about that. For the most industrious people, or for the people who are so industrious as the Southeast in the world, in Nigeria, and for people who have the kind of access we have to sea, you
yeah,
know, it's crazy that we do not have a seaport. It's crazy we do not have an international airport. It's crazy that I cannot fly from Enugu to London at will, or from Enugu to Paris. It's crazy, But and these are the ways in which we've been marginalized, because and part of the reasons why are these things being done. I think there's this tendency, there's this sense in Nigeria that the Igbo people, their progress has to be maintained at a certain level. They should not the Igbo people should not have, or should not be so close to power again in this country. We've not come to the table to discuss the failed promises of Nigeria to Igbo people. We've not come to the table to discuss history, what really happened, why were Igbo people being killed? Was this really an Igbo, and I mean, was what happened in 1966 an Igbo? Of course, a lot
yeah.
of people come out to say it was not. And
Anybody who really knows
yeah,
history knows ordinarily it wasn't the
yeah,
case.
the most recent, funny enough,
It's
was
IDD.
Babangida implying that, even though he did not say it directly, but it was very clear as day what he was implying. You know,
Yeah,
and that has been, some of Nigeria has offended the Igbo people and wounded Igbo people in such a profound way that, in order to get some reconciliation, it will take a bit of work. And this is not the kind of work the Nigeria people seem to be ready to do at this
yeah,
point. And that is quite sad. And a lot of agitations have arisen to fight for Biafra. There has been there has been Wazirike's movement,
yeah,
Maso, and then
yeah.
there
So
has been Nnamdi
Nnamdi
Kanu's
Kanu
Inauguration of Biafra, IPOB. And I have I have been a very I've always been a big sympathizer of Nnamdi Kanu, and he's not perfect. He's not, of course, nobody is perfect, but to Nnamdi Kanu. One cannot listen to him unbiasedly with an open mind, without seeing the points that he's making, without seeing, without seeing where he's coming from. And perhaps that's a discussion for another day. But
sure.
it's this also leads me to the point where I have to say that Igbo people, we on the other hand, are a big part of our own problem as well. We seem like a psychologically subdued people, and that is putting it very lightly. You know, people as a people, we have become masters of abandoning our own and embracing other people's own. We have not really, in the contemporary times, we have not really fought for ourselves as much as we ought to. And this is not saying we should have troubles or we should fight or we should be at loggerheads with other ethnic groups. No, this is talking about our own individual emancipations. Now this brings me to the politicians. When you look at our political figureheads and how their body language, whenever it comes to the issues that concern our people, you do not see the people who want the best for us. You don't even see them trying to propagate this consciousness that is being subdued in Nigeria. You know, we of the ethnic groups in Nigeria, the major ethnic groups, we are the ones more likely to have people who cannot speak the language, people who are not very conscious of our own history, people who are not
Yeah.
very conscious where we are coming from. And that has ignorance has a part to play in that. And the truth is, war, war never, people never remain the same after war again.
Yeah, I think
But
it was Father Chinoso Kudinka in his poem, this in Ozomena, that said, um, nobody really wins a war. Both sides live with eternal
yeah,
souvenirs. And
yeah, there's also this saying by Sartre that when the details of a victory is discussed, you know, it begins to look a lot more like a defeat. It begins to be harder to distinguish between a victory and a defeat.
yeah,
And yeah,
you look at the sense of when you conquer Macedonia, what next? He said, we're going
you
to
know,
march on to Greece. And he said, after
yes,
Greece, what next? He said, you're going to march on to the next place. And he was like, this becomes a Pyrrhic victory because in and
yes,
about you moving, you don't come to ordinarily enjoy your spoils.
yes,
So
yeah, yeah,
you fail to enjoy your spoils, and you're losing men. And in trying to conquer, same thing also happened to Napoleon. He was marching down to different places. Let's march down to Moscow, but in and about that, he met his fall at Waterloo, and
yeah,
in and about
yes,
that, it was
yeah.
a it was a very big point you pointed out there.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of because at this point we are talking about both the Nigerian and the Biafran side. Both
Yeah,
sides have
sure.
suffered losses in the war. There are a lot of stories of soldiers going to war and coming back and being unable to adjust any longer to their usual environment. I was reading, Doris Lessing had her father had been one of the British soldiers that fought in one of these in the First World War. And she grew up, of course, she grew up in Iraq and she grew up in Africa, parts of Africa. And part of why her family spent a lot of time living around the world was because when her father returned from the First World War, he could no longer adjust to the society. And his place of work had to transfer him to Persia, and from Persia to Tehran. And from Tehran, they moved to Zimbabwe, which was Rhodesia at the time.
Yeah.
So there's this thing about when Nigerian soldiers come out to tell their stories, especially those who tell it in the very, very, in a very, very humane way, you begin to understand seriously how a lot of what went on was an erroneous, was just very, very erroneous in a lot of ways. A lot of Nigerian soldiers, a lot of Nigerian soldiers did not really know what they were fighting for. So it's so when you really look at it, you find out that it's really, really a no victor, no vanquish. It's a no victor situation, but it is not a no vanquished situation because it's a no victor, but both sides are vanquished. So in order for Nigeria to go forward, the Igbo people, the conversation of what has happened really has to take place, not just for the benefit of the Igbo people, but for the benefit of the other, all of us as well. And that has been kind of where my mind has been, where my philosophy has been heading towards of recent. But also while I am while when we look at it from a humane angle, we also have to understand that the politics of oppression, which is something that holds all of us down in Nigeria, it's almost impossible for that kind of politics to be resolved by pacific, by pacific rhetoric. Which is
Hmm.
why it is important for us to also have people who talk tough, people who speak out. It's important for us to have the society tilt towards, you know, a revolution, a revolutionary approach, a revolutionary mindset. So I think that for this reason, also our writers have to be very, very conscious of the situation. I noticed that intellectuals, when they talk about the Nigerian situation, they always have topics that they try not to breach. They want to talk about everything in the context of Nigeria as it currently is currently constituted. And to be honest, I don't see how our solution is in this current situation. Something has to change. Something has to give. So and a lot of it circles back to two things: the 1914 amalgamation and the Nigeria Biafra, or the Biafran genocide, which is now recorded as the Nigeria Biafra War.
Yeah, if you look at the amalgamation, look at what Lugard said about the marriage between the north and the south. The whole idea of a wealthy, well-to-do industrious wife getting married to the other side to get to ordinarily supplement what ordinarily has been. And
Yeah.
Iken Oke pointed out something to me in one of our conversations that all of is a nutritionist. All of a sudden, this rhetoric of the North feeding the South is something that has ordinarily come to be. And he's asking me a question, and he's asking all of us, how is it possible that a place so close to the Sahara ordinarily was given the title of what ordinarily feeds a part that is a rainforest as well as different other
Yeah.
mangroves get to grow, and nobody's really asking the question that at
Yes.
the point the north blocked goods from coming into the south, and it was a thing people could panic about,
Yeah.
and it doesn't just make sense. I grew up in Cross River, and there's nothing you plant down that particular side that doesn't grow, and it's not in the north.
So
That was
we, yeah,
that was me cutting you short about the
yeah,
amalgamation
yeah,
stuff. Sorry about that.
yeah. No, no, that was actually the end of my answer. But we really have to look at Nigeria for what it is.
Yeah,
We really have to look at it for what it is. I think it is wrong to idealize an institution, especially when the institution has been laid on so many wrong, on the kind of, if I might say, the wrong foundation. I
sure.
think Nigeria has been designed in such a way that, a false sense of symbiotic relationship between the South and the North, Now, in southern Nigeria used to have its, has had its day in agriculture. When we look at Nigeria in the 1950s, in the 1960s, we see that some of the biggest plantations were in Yoruba land. As a matter of fact,
Sure.
The Igbo people used to be one of the, we used to be one of the highest producers of yam in the world. And even yam is so integral to us that it is a part of our culture.
It's like a
Yam,
thing left for the men,
yeah,
and women
you
can do
understand?
almost every other thing, but then
Yam,
the man farms the yam.
yam has a gender in Igbo culture.
Sure.
So and then when you look at the architecture of the old eastern region under Chief Michael Okpara,
Yeah.
you find out that there was a very big plan for agriculture. The role agriculture was to play for the development of the economy of the new region.
Mm-hmm.
Obudukatu Ranch today, a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know that it was Michael Okpara who laid the idea and actually built
Sure.
Obudukatu Ranch. And it was not built to just be a tourist attraction the
Tourist
way it
place.
is
Yeah.
now. It was built to be an agricultural plantation as well, you know. And today, a lot of us don't even talk a lot about Chief Michael Okpara. And let me also say this, after Biafra, there were, like I said earlier, there were certain strategic moves made by the Nigerian government to prevent development in certain sectors.
Example:
Not
the
just
Ajakuta steel.
exactly, not just in the southeast, but in the south in general. You get so the Ajaokuta steel, for example, was clear as daylight that it was supposed to be situated in the
Down
southeast.
here. I
but
have an
not
uncle who works within the Ministry of Mines, and he told me the whole story. And up until why it's not even functioning up until today, and it's just so sad to
it's
get to think
crazy.
about.
It's a white elephant project now. And it still boils down to that thing that Igbo say. Onye ji mmadụ n'ala ji onwe ya. You cannot trample upon the humanity of others and expect.
And then you want to,
Yes, he who holds another on the ground holds himself too. So I think that has been the unfortunate situation of Nigeria. And now agriculture, the fact that agriculture is not, making headways in the south is a very, very deliberate. There are very, very many deliberate ploys that have been put to, you know, block the ideas of large scale farming, flourishing in these parts. Of course, in the individuals can do their part. You could be a rich person and go into agriculture, but there's something our people really need to understand. There's only so much a man can do. There's only so much individuals can do. The progress of a society is not dependent on having many prosperous individuals. It's dependent on having a collective that is prosperous. All of us coming together. Are we good? The Igbo people, for example, we have many rich men, but we are strong. We have strong individuals, but as a collective, we are very weak. As a collective, we are very weak. And it's also part of the result of the trauma we suffer from the genocide, because we are a civilization built on the principle of Onyahala Wania.
of course,
We didn't used to, so we need to realize this individualistic mentality and what it is doing to us. And we really need to begin to trace our steps back. Agriculture is something it's something definitely that we cannot do without, even in the pathway to progress, even in the course of retracing our steps. We have to go back to a lot of those blueprints that were put together by people like Michael Opara in the Old Eastern region, people like Chinua Achebe and Chika Chukwumerije in the Ahiara Declaration, some of the other intellectuals. We have to go back to some of these well thought out ways, or well thought out, product of true intellectualism. We really need one of the things we really need in these societies. We really need honesty. We need hard boiled honesty. And we really need to work with it. And we need courage as well, because it's going to take a lot to change a lot of the rots in the system.
It's a whole lot of stuff we sometimes ordinarily don't even want to be reminded of. We don't ordinarily want to be told ordinarily what we are ordinarily supposed to do, and how ordinarily things are ordinarily supposed to go. And you've mentioned a whole lot of names down here that we ordinarily, when we look back, you get to look at. You talked about Uche Chukwumerije. You get to see Achebe talking about him in his seminar work, The Trouble with Nigeria, dedicating it to the likes of him and a whole lot of other persons that worked post Biafra to ordinarily see to it that we ordinarily come to where we ordinarily are. Are they perfect human beings? No, of course. And that's a big flaw. Ordinarily, I also see in and about conversations now you get to see within the political realm, people wanting people to be perfect humans. If not even in the monasteries will you find people who are perfect. I also have ties with people down the church from monastic experience and different stuff. You get to see that they're not perfect human beings, and a typical Christian ordinarily knows that particular idea, as opposed to the current trend of holiness and virginity challenge and whatsoever, majoring in the minor and all that. And these people have been saying a whole lot of things down their particular part. I think it was the Lebanese poet, I think that was Gibran. Gibran that talked about, if I can remember well, he talked about, pitying the nation, are full of beliefs and empty of religion, and in and about a nation that ordinarily does not produce its own food, and conversations in and about this, pity the nation that ordinarily cannot look at themselves and say, we eat every day. If you've not eaten something, you will do that after our conversation. And even the water we get to take in between our conversations down here is also classified as food. You did
Yeah.
biology. So
Yes.
it's food in and of itself. So you look at these conversations and people are just, how will I say, so individualistic, as you've pointed out. And Franz Fanon, in his Wretched of Earth, will get to tell us the idea of tell the people that development and sustenance doesn't come from the leaders. It comes in and about the collective whole and people coming together to do things
Yeah.
for themselves. Schools, universities, research centers, stuff like you're doing, art centers should ordinarily be looked at. With all the beautiful houses we have in Oka, down to Aguleri, down to um, Afikpo, and the different places you can get to find things from Pius Ayim's place in Abomege and down to Okigwe and all that. Systems have not been put in place.
Yeah.
They are just buildings, and this was also something Ikenna pointed out the idea of we build houses without the science behind it. I took a class 3 years ago about African architecture, and I get to look at the works of different persons from Francis in Burkina Faso to our own Demas Nwoko down there in Nigeria. You get to see that there's a science as to how they build, and even before they came, there were different scientific ways of ordinarily how we build houses, so that how air will ordinarily enter the OB of the man's house and the other houses in and about there. But now, people just want to put blocks and put
Yes.
glasses and call it luxury. And it's
It's
in and
true.
about everything is tacked beyond with this idea of luxury. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to do this thing without the way we are doing it, having these conversations. And the youth ordinarily also are beginning to be told that a thing like money is in and about everything they should get to chase. But
Mhm.
what is money but social construct when ordinary things have not really been sorted out for youths within our current situation that get to tell themselves, or maybe before that, let's just still walk around these themes a bit. The let's just wrap up the idea of our current situation, and as it concerns how will I say it? Biafra. Chimamanda has talked about the idea of where will the border be. It's a problem. Are we to start exploring options of emancipating the East within the country itself? A thing like California, the economy down there within the American. I know we cannot compare ourselves with the whole American way of doing federalism and all that.
Yeah.
Should we begin to look at how to build ourselves within and look at how we can make this competition still happen? And it's a thing you had pointed out earlier, the idea of a twofold way of either healthy competition between neighbors or competitions thereof still as one. I think like um, your former boss is trying to do with East Side Ventures.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, the solution to the problem as it is now is twofold. Either we go back to true federalism, which is every region has autonomous control over its resources,
Yeah,
or we are better off existing as good neighbors in the sense that a referendum is conducted and the country is perhaps split according to ideological and ethnic lines. You get so you mentioned something about Chimamanda's question
take
about
on the border.
yeah, I've thought about that. I've thought about that at certain time, but I don't think it's the kind of question that annoys the struggle because
Sure, sure, sure.
The Europeans came here in 1884 and they divided Africa into,
And
you
it's
know,
exactly what again?
and in
1885 to it's
in
almost.
1880, yeah, it's
It was
almost
celebrated last week, last
yes,
uh, last last
140
last
years.
last year,
Yeah,
last
yeah,
month rather, not last
yeah,
year.
140 years, and it's crazy because I mean Europeans came here and they divided the place. So why should it be a problem for us on how to divide our own place within ourselves? So I think there's definitely a way to do that. The border, there was a border before. There was something drawn during Biafra, and there's something that can be drawn from that as well. So in each of the solutions that are proposed, there's one thing that is constant. The healthy competition is something that has to come to play. In Nigeria, there's no healthy competition. In Nigeria, what we have is ethnic bigotry. You understand? Ethnic bigotry is the problem, and nobody is trying to say this is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it to the best of quality. Let's see what this other person is doing. Or no, for me, for example, I take there's this example I like to give of myself. In my younger years, in my early 20s, I went to Lagos, I went to Abeokuta to attend arts and books festivals, and I saw what these guys were doing with the arts and books festival, and I saw what people like Efe Paul Azino and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
German and Nikolapo were doing, and I was so in love with it. Even Ake Festival, and I came back and I decided that I wasn't. We decided that we weren't happy that we did not have this kind of things back home. This is healthy competition. It doesn't. It's the kind of thing that should be encouraged among our people. And when we have, when the country becomes restructured, it leaves room for more of this to happen when more people control their resources. So yeah, I think that this is why healthy competition should be not challenge why healthy competition should be encouraged. And there is really a lot to say, but in every good relationship there are good boundaries.
Sure.
There are good boundaries in every good relationship. Part of the reason why Nigeria is the way it is because we see ourselves as enemies instead of friends. Something has to be done to encourage that sense of friendship, And truly, I meet a lot of Yoruba people. I meet a lot of Hausa people. For me, I've always said that the best human beings we have in this country are from the north. When you talk about what it takes to be humane, the Northerners are not. They are the least ethnically bigoted people.
Not the stuff we are
Yeah,
being told
yeah.
ordinarily
They
about them,
don't.
right?
They actually have very very little ethnic bigotry in them. The problem most of them have is religious bigotry. You
Sure.
know, religious bigotry is a thing of the north, and now where the problem of a place like Nigeria is where the issues of a particular religion is being considered as something that is going to affect the whole, even people that are not part of the religion. And also, in the other case, like in the south, where there's a lot of ethnic bigotry, like the Igbo and Yoruba, between the Igbo and Yoruba, you see people trying to make decisions that they feel like would favor more of their own ethnic group than the whole. And it's really sad because a lot of us we really need to understand that the ordinary people are united in the same kind of suffering. And these ethnic and religious sentiment, bigoted sentiments, are usually pushed by the politicians. And who does it favor in the end? They themselves. Nigeria as it is, Nigeria, when Nigeria eventually gets restructured, is going to favor, it's not just going to favor the Southeast, it's not going to favor the Southeast, it's going to favor every single faction. But the problem,
Yeah.
where the problem lies is that why it is so difficult for changes like this to come about is there are certain people that will definitely, who are in the front seats, who will definitely be going to the back seats.
They
And
fear
then
for that.
they fear for that. And there are people who are at the back seats who are more or less nobodies now who are going to have to come to the front. You know, this is the reason. And this is part of does not just affect our political landscape, it affects our cultural landscape. Nollywood, for example, it's part of the reason why you look at Nollywood. Nollywood produces more mediocre stuff than it should produces far less quality stuff than it should. Um, it's not because of the lack of expertise or the lack of people who can write good scripts. It's just that excellence, there's a politics that prevents excellence from being at the front stage, where if you say
Yeah.
there must be excellence here, that means we must leave ethnic bigotry by the side. We must leave favoritism by the side. We must leave nepotism by the side if excellence is at the forefront. So, in order to encourage excellence both at the political and at the cultural scene, these are the things that need to be fought against. And you don't just fight against, you don't just wake up and start fighting against them, because there are institutions that uphold these things. Now you have to either restructure these institutions or do away with them totally. So much of our problem is a structural and institutional problem. And Nigeria, something has to happen in Nigeria. Something, not the 4 years, every 4 years election which we are talking about. No, something has to happen, because um, good leaders don't come from thin air. It is
Of
a good
course.
it is a good system that produces good leaders. And part of the problem we have in Nigeria is that we've not passed through stage one and stage two, and we want to jump to stage three. The path to nation building is, first of all, building a good system. And now a good system is what brings about credible institutions like an independent electoral system, a good security and everything. And now it is this kind of system that produces a good leader. And before from good leadership, then nation building. So we need to go through the process. We shouldn't keep jumping and looking for illusions. At the end of the day, the people who are pushing these illusions that if one person is voted, the country will change overnight, are the people who will benefit from the candidacy of that person.
Of course.
So, yeah, that is how I see it. That is how I see it.
Definitely. I also share your view that it is not electing one person and the person ordinarily getting to change everything. And people bring up the idea of Trump, and I tell people America can comfortably function without a president because they have structures already in place. You didn't hear so much of Biden as it concerns the way you heard of Obama, or the way you heard of Clinton, or the way you even heard of Trump in his first term.
Yeah,
But it didn't negate the fact that America functioned the way it functioned, as though it didn't have a president, because Biden at the point in time was there as though he wasn't the president. But we
yeah,
make this hasty comparison of putting America and putting Nigeria side by side. America is like, in terms of independence, America is like going through like the latest point of menopause, while Nigeria is not even yet at the level of puberty, if we are to even go by that. But that doesn't mean that we must go through all the length of years America took to ordinarily come to terms with itself. Because if you want to look at it by sense of civilization, how many years ago were women allowed to vote in America? How many years ago were blacks allowed to vote? And what about issues concerning racism that is in and about conversation up until today? So I share your sentiments and your belief that everybody's hand needs to be on deck, and we
yeah,
must do this thing together. The carpenter shouldn't be ashamed of being a carpenter, because we need chairs to sit on, we need tables to sit on. The mechanic just has to up his game and come to terms with the fact that he doesn't have to confuse us with identifying madmen, because he can do his mechanic work, but probably not that dirty, and he can do it in a much more organized way. The
yeah,
teacher shouldn't be made to become so frustrated that he or she takes the frustration on the students, because no country, like you rightly said, no country can exist without its people ordinarily being educated. How will the people ordinarily make progress without them being educated? And I had professors back in school who ordinarily, and like, how would you call it? You want to call it minimum wage down here in Europe, and then they tell you it's not the money. It's in and about what leads the society to go where the society wants to go, that they ordinarily do. And what are the ways we can develop this? Okay, grant. Men and women have money back home, but you are the one who go canvassing for stuff for your festival. How
yeah.
has it fared? What have you been met with disappointment? Have you been very, very encouraged as it concerns how people respond to stuff like this?
Yeah, over the years, I've come to a new consciousness, a more like I've been disillusioned about who we really are as a people. When we began Umofia Arts and Books Festival, we had the idea that we're going to meet certain people and we're going to canvass for supports and funds. And in the process, we came to a new realization of, more like you kind of rude awakening, which I mean, if we should have known, but it is what it is. So the thing is, there's this literary and lack, there's this deficit in literary and cultural consciousness about our people. We are not very enthusiastic about the arts and about philosophy and about science, even, and how these things shape us. We still have that buying and selling mindset. And meanwhile, the world is moving in such a way that, I mean, both technologically, artistically, and you have to be, in order to be at the forefront, you have to be at the forefront of these things. When we look at
Sure.
the nations we call successful nations, where are they in terms of, they don't just have money and military welfare,
Hmm.
they support the literary arts, they support their sciences, their scientists. In fact, their scientists are their most important citizens. They have
Of course.
philosophers who are the mainstream, who everybody tune in to listen to. This is the problem that the Igbo people have. Mind you, when I talk about problems, I always kind of, if we talk about Nigeria, but I always kind of limit it a bit to the Igbo people because
Of course. It's your
it's,
immediate reality.
yeah, 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 it's my immediate reality, and there are things that I can say about the Igbo people without being labeled as
Confidently,
tribal.
without being
Yeah,
without
without being scared of.
generalization.
Yes, exactly. So the Igbo people, we, like I said, we have a lot of the people who have the money to support us are not lacking. But when you go and you talk to them and you tell them we want to bring a number of writers and artists together and do a celebration of arts and culture, and we want to bring young people into a space where they can learn more about how to foster their arts, and we also want to get some grants to sponsor for a book, so some younger people to get books. They listen to you, and the next thing you hear is, what is in it for me? you know and then you also meet some of our culture stakeholders, some of the people who are popular in the arts, and they want to get paid beyond what you can afford. But also, even what is the most heartbreaking is that some of these people will tell you outrightly that they've spent a lot of money supporting BB Niger this year, and hence they do not have enough budget to support the Arts and Books Festival.
And it's not as if they are supporting such projects for free. It's because of the advertisement that gets to come out of such stuff
Yes,
of
yes,
their brands.
and crazy, and well, I'm not. And the fact is, I don't know so much or I can't claim to know enough to say that supporting BB Niger is a waste of resources. But
I'm not saying
at
so
the end of
too.
the day, yeah, at the end of the day, somehow you feel like if you could spend millions in some of these shows, which somehow it feels like you are looking for some sort of validation from your brand. I mean, supporting the arts with ₦1 million would also give you some of. Is capable of giving you some of this validation. So
Sure.
in countries like America, in Britain, we see some of these grants, some of these foundations that support fellowships, residencies. They are named after individuals. People become successful, they become rich, and then they build a foundation in support of the arts, in support of intellectualism. But our
Alfred
people,
Nobel.
yeah, our people don't think about that as much as they ought to do. We keep thinking what is in it for me instead of what is in it for the society. So I think that this is one of the realizations that I came through. It's quite sad, but it's also an opportunity for us to begin to educate our people, for us to begin to have these conversations, and for us to begin to say it so that more people can learn. Because irrespective of the disappointments, we've had a few people who have supported us, who have given us support, like my boss, Gaius Chibeze. I don't we he's still my boss.
Bitcoin
Um,
chief.
yeah,
He grew up in
he's
Cross River too.
yeah, yeah, he grew up in Crossroads, and it's so fantastic because he inspires me a lot, because he's somebody that is very, very progressive minded. He's one of the few people I've spoken with about the tendencies to support legacy projects necessarily have um that do not necessarily have
immediate
immediate
proceeds
reform.
come out of it,
Yeah,
and
and yes, and he understands the importance very well. It's if we have 5 to 10 young people like him, I don't think we do. If we have 5 to 10 young people who have money and who have that kind of mindset, it will do a lot to take us further. Another person is Eke Urum, the founder of the CEO of Rice Vest Investment. Is an investment platform.
yeah,
I met him 2 years ago at the Alibo Youth Forum in Owerri. And, we didn't meet directly, but we had spoken. And I think what I said made an impression on him, and what he said made an impression on me. And last year, he reached out to me and he supported our festival. In fact, he gave us, if I should say, a quarter of the money, the budget, the eventual budget, a quarter of the money came from the support he gave. So these are the kind of young people. Then we have a lot of other individuals like Dr. Kevin Alaneme,
yeah.
you know, who has given us his support, and
And
some
he
of
has supported the art in a whole lot
yeah,
of ways. And you see his you see
yeah,
his artistic reviews and in and about that, and you get to ask
yes,
yourself,
yeah,
he's a medical doctor. He's trying to help people get their footing in
clearly,
terms of migration and in and
yeah,
about that. He has a book coming up, Nothing Spoil, and
yeah, and it's a book. I am going to review that book.
yeah, I saw
And
your comment. I saw your
yeah.
comment in and about that, and
Yeah, he's one of the people who inspires me to, Onye Kamwele was also somebody who reached out to me out of the blues last year. Well,
it is not small out of the
yeah,
blues.
so prior,
Onyeka,
prior,
Onyeka is a man in
yeah,
his own way, and I really
yeah,
appreciate what he's doing. And I learned he recently
yeah,
he has acquired the rights to the African Writers series.
yeah, yes, he was doing something. He's doing something along that line. He's trying to reproduce a kind of series that is, through that same philosophy. I think he was friends with the man who started the
James
writers,
Query.
James Curry. Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so we had some serious problems. I think a few years back, but out of the blues last year, he reached out to me and he supported the festival. And naturally, knowing Onyeka, I was wondering what do I owe this favor, and and he gave me a very very he told me something that was quite thoughtful and made me like. He said, it's for the good, it's for the support of the arts. Because if I was selling pornography, for example, I would have much more customers by now. But
Of
nobody
course, of course.
nobody wants to support the arts. Mhm.
I have a German friend who told me if I just want to go very viral with my podcast, I should just come out without my shirt one day and run an episode. And she's like, she's
you
like,
know,
you're gonna get followership that you can't even imagine that you ordinarily will get. You're here
you
struggling
know,
with how many views. Just come out
yeah.
with your shirt, say something very stupid. You are there, and
Which is sad. But I think Onyeka is also somebody who has walked in my shoes to a large extent, and he understands the struggle. I hope that many of our people would be able to do that kind of thing. There are many other people who have supported, some few individuals who have in their little way supported us, and I shout out to my brother Patrick, no Patrick Emeka, who has sent me. He's a struggling student like the rest of us. But he did his very little best to support us as well. My friend
Patrick is a
Chinua,
wonderful
yeah,
poet.
yeah, my friend Chinua isn't one of he too. Although he has to do more for us, but he's also somebody who's always looking out for us, and we appreciate
And
him for that
yeah,
as well.
and in the course of this conversation, I would have even started with that. He has a question for you. He was the
Oh,
last person I had
oh,
on the podcast. He asked a question that should be asked to the next person. So
all
that's in
right.
and about what I do. So I will ask you the question at the close of our conversation. It's in and about if you
Okay.
can trace your ancestry, because he's having the naming coming
Oh,
out in this in sometimes
yeah,
this year. That's 1st of December.
yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. It's so like I was saying, we have in as much as we've been having disappointments, we've had some people who support us, and that is the positive that I take from it. And I'm also not going to forget to talk about the young people who work with me, my team,
Volunteers in and about that.
volunteers. I mean, people like Edna Chinazao Hero, my friend Ebri Kowaki, Chidera Chinedu, um, you know, there's also another of my, her name Chiamaka. I think her name is Chiamaka. I can't remember her full name now. So these are very young people who are very passionate about the arts, who are ready to work around the clock. Even one of them got married recently, and I think former Benjamin. So yeah, I appreciate the efforts of our young people. It's I think when a person, one thing I've realized is that when a person is looked upon as a leader, when a person is looked upon as a good man, in as much as we have to applaud the person for having those characteristics, the main for me, I think the main honor goes to the people around the person, because you can never really be you can never truly be considered good if the people around you do not appreciate your good works and try to interpret it in that light. You can never really be a leader if people do not follow you, if people do not, believe in what you are doing and live what some of what they are doing and follow, which is why I so much appreciate the community of young people that the Eagle Nest literary movement has given to us. Yeah, so we keep moving, we keep pushing more, we keep talking to people, so unnaturally we meet people more and more, we talk to more people, and hopefully we are getting more support this year than we got last year.
Wow, that is a whole lot of stuff down there. It's just like what Newton talked about, standing on the shoulders of great men. Because
Yeah,
yeah, why the likes of Neil Tyson Greece also talk about the revolutionary ideas of Newton. You get to also see that before Newton, there guys would come up, from
yeah,
Copernicus to Kepler
Galileo,
to
yeah.
Ptolemaic to different persons who have
Galileo,
done things
yeah,
not necessarily so scientific to a large extent, but for their times were very, very revolutionary. And when Newton came and the whole idea of the apple falling on him and all that, you could see a great shift in thinking and in
yes,
and
yes,
about that. The son to Uche Chukwumerije, DK Chukwumerije, believes in one Nigeria. He believes that the country ordinarily can do well off, but in and about, there are conditions to why he thinks that way. One, the largest black nation, we can harness from that particular point, and in and about also the fact that if things ordinarily are done with equity and as well as equality ordinarily also, we must ordinarily, like the saying go, come with clean hands, right? One who comes to equity must do so with clean hands. But at the moment, we are not there. Ojuku, in Because I Am Involved, talked about the idea of the tribe and the idea of the nation. And for the nation to ordinarily make sense, we have to push away tribal sentiments and in and about that. Is Nigeria essentially Nigeria? Is there something essentially about Nigeria as it concerns identity, or you think it's a work in progress? Do we have Nigerians, so to say, or you think it's still something we have not achieved? And because most of the time we fall back to the tribe. Anything happens one way or the other, we fall back to the tribe. You get to see, like the pogrom, people had to leave where they were. And one of the most graphic memories you have about this is Chimamanda's depiction of ordinarily the train scene and the girl with plaited hair and in the basket is something that left it left something
yeah.
very scary in me, whereby you ordinarily see that it can be that gruesome, and you watch the movie for me ordinarily didn't really do justice as it concerns. I know there were laws as to what can be said in the movie, and there were different parts that were cut, and it wasn't even allowed to be streamed in the country. Do we have an essential Nigerian identity, or you think it's something we can work out, or think it's something probably that would never happen?
We, talking about a pan-Nigerian identity. Um, it depends on what angle you look at it from. Okay,
Yeah,
like a national identity is always built on something that is common to all the citizens of the country. For example, there's the American dream. America is a country built on, we know the principles, like, and it's
sure.
largely a capitalist country. So there's this thing about hard work, honesty, and that is built into the American identity, the American dream. But we can't really say that of Nigeria. And then when you look at Europe, for example, you realize that a lot of their identity is built on ethnicity, the same ethnicity that some of us try to paint as something that is bad. And then when it comes to Pan-Africanism and Pan-Nigerianism, there's nothing like that. But assuming we were to assume or imagine that it exists in the reality, in the real sense, the only thing that has brought us all together, the only thing that has made us all have a singular language with which we have conversations, the only thing that makes us look as if we are striving to work together to be one at times is colonialism. Colonialism is the central of the Nigerian identity.
Yeah.
And that is why, we've not yet been able to reimagine Nigeria, to reconstruct Nigeria away from the colonial identity, away from the colonial consciousness that brought about it. And that is why we keep suffering the effects of neocolonialism, you know. So now, if we are ever going to have a Nigerian identity, we need to come together with something that is us, something that we've sat down to discuss within ourselves. And, you know, after discussing it within ourselves, we agreed within ourselves and we implemented it. And that is what the Aburi Accord would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was two young leaders from Nigeria, Ojukwu and Gowon, meeting in Ghana, which is an African country, under another African leader. It
Sure.
was what was supposed to have been. But somehow we allowed the white man to interfere in what was going on. And what we have today is still a colonial construct. Is there a Nigerian identity? Yes. But it is not Nigerian in the sense of created by Nigerians and for Nigerians, but it is still an offshoot created by the British for the exploitation of Africa for the benefit of the British. We are still yet to move beyond that, and that is a large part of why we are having the problems that we have.
It's very disheartening to say the least. And in as much as we continue not to look at things, we get pseudo intellectuals like Reno Mockery get to peddle the different things, get to peddle down there and
Crazy.
blocking in and about almost everybody, right? And that gets to try to challenge him. And at least now I have rested in as much as he has finally blocked me completely from getting to see the things he get to say. And
Thank
for
God.
almost a year I've had my peace, right? And I don't really, my sister gets to send me stuff here and there about him. I'm like, who made you my secretary? I don't want to even see. But there's danger.
Yeah.
There's danger in as much as we have people like this who can easily shift camps, and in as much as not even, and people look, they have following, people look up to them. And it's not about also education. It's not about education, and it's not about how things ordinarily have been. But just a simple question: is there a thing with you guys in the sciences? It's not about leaving the sciences for the arts. I said this. I asked this question to Chisom Okafor. I asked this question to Hike Noke. I'm asking this question to you. I have not been able to ask the question to Chimamanda, and I wasn't opportune to ask Achebe. Neither was I opportune to ask JM Code Z. But what is it about you guys doing the sciences and moving from the sciences into the art? Just like Isaac, this thing, Asimov, and in and about conversations like this and his kind of way of writing. What is the thing? Is it something that should be looked out for? Maybe when I give birth to my children, I should say, okay, go do the sciences and then from there become a
No.
literary
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. So for me, I think for every person that shifts or appears to shift from the sciences to the arts, there
Yeah.
are millions others who focus on the sciences as they studied it. And
Of course, of course.
so we are like an exception. There's something, we are like an exception in, so what I think is the cause is, I think, for everybody you've mentioned now, there's one factor. It's a calling.
Yeah.
It's a calling. I was a very good science student. I was always the best in my class in chemistry, and I was very good in biology as well. I wanted to do something in the medical sciences, but like I said, I'd also grown up with this literary and artistic consciousness because of my father and having had the best literature teachers in secondary school, So, but what happened was at the close to the, my 300 level, I began to write. I fell in love with poetry and I began to write. And the more I wrote, the more I wanted to write. The more I improved, the more I wanted to improve. So basically, it was like a calling. And one day, after reading Chinua Achebe's Arrow of God again, for the second time in adulthood, I sat down and I told myself that it it would be a good idea to write a book that would do something that would do to people exactly what this book has done to me. And that, was like the solidification of that process. So I think it's a calling. It just catches up with you at some point. Like Chimamanda has this saying that she used to write poems in biology
behind
class.
our chemistry book, and
I
it's like,
mean, I mean, similar thing happened to me too. In my final year, all I could do was write and read poetry. Achebe discovered that the sciences, the medicine was not his kettle of fish, as
and
he
he had a
said.
scholarship, and he had a scholarship for
He
that, and he
had
had to
to, I
abandon
mean, he
that
had to abandon the scholarship, and Jem Coetzee, whose own
yeah.
kind of happened in his late 20s, almost similar. You just find yourself in love with the artistic process. And everywhere you go, everything you see becomes a muse, becomes an inspiration. The woman selling food to you who forgets to give you your change, the little
Becomes a
child,
need for you to,
the little child hawking, but having a faraway look in their eyes, the woman selling at the market but who appears to be very sad. You begin to see humanity from a very deep perspective, and you begin to see the possibility of stories and poetry from all of this. And when you get to that process, there's almost no going back. That was how it was for me.
and I think it was Chimamanda that said on their way, was it on Suka or something with the mom, she just looked out of the window and from inside the car, she was like, she saw too many stories that ordinarily one person cannot tell. And
Yeah,
it's in and about the
mhm.
fact that there are just too many stories with very few persons to get to tell them. But in the likes of Umar Abubakar Sidi, the
Yeah,
one who ordinarily at the moment is like one of the most unique poetic voices in Nigeria today.
yeah,
What fascinates you about the body of their work? I know you is someone you've talked about. When his last book came out, you were in and about almost everywhere, getting to like, you know, this guy has to be listened to, this guy has to be listened to. Like, what really fascinates you beyond, the snipers we get to see on your social media posts and engagement about the collection of his work? I know um, Paul Lime has recently
yeah,
published an essay about him looking at it from a broader perspective, I think from a meta-analytical perspective, as opposed to just reading for reading. And what fascinates you about this writer of ours?
yeah. Umar Abubakar CD has been around for about 23 years now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Funny, he's been around for a while, but I think he came into the literary scene in a very new in a newer light, in the late 2010s, I think, and there's just indeed there is something unique about this particular writer because first of all, his first point of re-entry is through poetry. You know, his
Yeah,
first collection, The
the
Poet of
point of
Dust,
dust.
second
Yeah,
collection, like Art Raska scattered about by like
sure,
butterflies,
sure.
butterflies scattered about like Art Raska. So there was something very unique about the kind of poems he was writing. And it comes at a time when there was this conversation about the poetry of Nigerian poets beginning to look alike, beginning to look
Mm-hmm.
the same. A lot of people were beginning to get interested in similar topics. And now, as opposed to the Facebook revolution, which brought about many writers, there was now
Mm-hmm.
American magazine Factor, which was now like the gatekeeper of the kind of poems we get to write and we get to see. So this poet
Yeah,
was different. He was inspired by the Sufi
sure,
philosopher.
sure, sure.
His style was more like, I mean, if an exorcist was writing poetry, if a child, a fascinated child was trying to explore poetry,
Mm-hmm.
and that was very, 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 it was very important because he was taking inspiration from a place that not many people were taking
Looking at.
inspiration. I had read some of the Lessons work and seeing the impact that the Sufi philosophers had on our work. So I was naturally um, attracted and interested in the work of this writer. But what has really made though his poetry was successful, his novels have also brought about have his novels last year was a very, very, very integral point of conversation.
Yeah.
And that is because it is almost unlike any other thing that has been produced in Nigerian literature. In
It's
you
like a
say,
scripture.
yeah,
Like
it's
you rightly
yeah,
said, you talked
yes,
about it
yes,
being divided into books.
yes.
You wrote an
So
article about him coming to the festival at some time, and you captured in and about the different stuff he has talked about. And I remember now. You were talking about him from a military background, also um
yeah,
from the
yes,
perspective of being a writer. Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. So see this novel. What makes it spectacular is that it is quite different. It is quite different from anything that has come out that I know of that has come out from Nigerian literature in the last 25 years, even perhaps beyond. It's not, first of all, the fact is that the book is not plot based. And second of all, it has elements of streams of consciousness and it
Mm-hmm.
has elements of, it has this Italo Calvino style of writing with Borges, with the mix with the Borges kind of writing, and you could even see a bit of the glimpse of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Marquezian style of
Yeah,
writing.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Though,
yeah, yeah.
though that's very minimal. So, but in order to write that kind of book, you have to have this madness going on for you because, especially in the Nigerian landscape where a lot of writers seem to follow a template. I think CD had that madness, but it was just beyond the madness. He is a writer that is very good with words. Having been a poet, he's somebody that is very good with words, and he's good in using words in the way that a prose writer has a very good background in poetry uses words,
Mm-hmm.
and he's very brilliant as well. So reading the book, I got that insight, and it's also the kind of book that you read and you arrive at. It's very chaotic. It seems not to be going anywhere, but the more you read the book, the more certain patterns begin to align in your brain. Because it shows that this is a work of subconscious rumination. A work of subconscious rumination, and there's this saying that in every chaos there's an order. There's a hidden order in every chaos.
Yeah, the world
So
is
I wrote
chaotic at the
about that.
moment, but it looks as though it's ordered.
Yeah, yes, yes. So that's one of the fantastic things. I think that is he's a writer that's a lot a lot of people should pay attention to, a lot of younger generation, and I'm happy that he's getting the attention that he deserves because part of the reason why writers like this may not be so confident to come forward in their craft wise in that way is because the system here doesn't really
Encourage.
promote dissidents, doesn't encourage dissidents. So yeah, Abubakar see this work is fantastic in that aspect. He brings innovation and he brings some good intellect to what he does, and he makes us see art in a very different perspective.
Achebe Ezenwa Oheto Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie,
Mhm.
three generations of Nigerian literature. How do you see their works shaping the Nigerian literary landscape? We've talked a bit about Achebe, and we cannot talk a bit about Achebe. Dim Anthony said Achebe is the saint of African literature who intercedes for us in the heavenly places of literature. And you understand why he's saying the saint, because Dim is studying to become a priest, but he's very, very much interested in literature. I went to see him in the monastery where he where he studied in Germany, and then we had a very very fruitful conversation sometime last year. And Achebe, what is this man? Who is this man to you? What has he done to you? And how have you seen his work coming forward? We can look at Arrow of God. We can look at the 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 big opus down there. Things fall apart. Is somebody, even while I was studying, I know when I was doing my defense, the first question that was asked to me was, "You know Chinua Achebe?" And I was like, I was like, I know Chinua Achebe, of course, because the professor was like, Achebe is a beautiful writer. And it's fascinating how you get to see old Western professors get to ask you about Achebe, and then they tell you, I have their work. Like I tell people, I was in Poland for an interview, and I was given the Polish version of Wole Soyinka's work to get to read as a closure for one of the interviews I conducted while I was researching about evil as it concerns the World War II, and in and about conversations about that. And it's very, very fascinating to see. What impression do you get out of reading Things Fall Apart, and what have we not learned from that particular situation? And it's in and about there you're getting the name for you for the literary festival
Yes.
you've come to found, or is it something else? I know it's that particular one, and you've talked about Unoka. Ugochukwu also has talked about Unoka in different ways, and the center of memories and conversations like that.
Yeah. So, um, Achebe was a constant presence in my house growing up because my father had read all his books, and there were certain times when my father gives us advice using an anecdote from what happened in Achebe's book. So, for example, there was a time my father was giving us like an education on social behavior, how to address your elders in public. So there was this point in um in the fourth novel, The Man of the People.
Man of the
I
people.
think
Okay.
I think somebody had called out to Chief Nanga
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
way that the person's father used to do, and Chief Nanga did not really like it. I remember my father using that as a as an example, using that as an example to of why perhaps you should not have that mindset that you are as close to somebody because your father is close to the person in that way. And also, there was also this anecdote also from, I think, Aunties of the Savannah. My father is an old
Yeah.
school kind of, so Ike also had this illiterate girlfriend who he chose over all the other brilliant, educated girls he could have chosen. He felt like this is the kind of woman that I can call in 12 in the midnight to prepare pounded yam for me, and she will jump up. That's why I'm with her. I want a woman that will give me peace.
It's not the person that
So
I'm remembering about now. The person I'm just thinking about is Mr. Nigeria and the whole saga about they do podcast
okay.
stuff about um,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
people that turn him on and stuff
Very,
like that.
yeah. So yeah, and also my father would also always talk about Oduche and his father, sending sending Oduche to the missionary so that he can be his eyes there and everything. So it was an ubiquitous presence in my upbringing, in my childhood, and I'd come to see the man as exactly what he is, a very brilliant and a doyen of wisdom. And when I began reading him, Things Fall Apart, when I read Things Fall Apart for the first time, it was like already reading something that you had already read. Somehow there wasn't much new in it that I was coming across because I've heard so much about it, and I already the condition. I mean, you just read it and you recognize the condition of things around you. But he also taught me some of the perspective of how things are presented in perspective in art. But it was Arrow of God, like I said earlier, that made the most profound impact because I tried to read it as a teenager, but even though I know some passages were memorable to me at the time, some passages were memorable to me at the time. It was kind of a book that was still too much, so big for my consciousness at then. So when I read it again at the age of 21, I was flawed. I was flawed because it taught me so much about the Igbo people. It's the window of understanding Igbo history. How what we have been as a people and how we've gotten to where we are. That was really, really fantastic. I think why Achebe was so great and greater than a lot of his predecessors and continue to be, so great is he understood that though we are very complex as human beings, though the society is complex, there are certain aspects of community, certain aspects of our behavior that can perhaps explain to a large extent who we are. you know, if things fall apart, there are some conversations, some quotes that are there that, in fact, it's almost like in every situation, there's an Achebe quote for every
Yeah.
situation. Every important event seems to have an Achebe quote that can fit into it. So it's that wisdom. So I've also been inspired, I've also been influenced by his essays. Sometimes I wonder if I am more influenced by his essays because um, I became an essayist after reading the first essay in the education of a British protected child. That was how my interest in essay began. It showed me a very different perspective of what essays could be, how essays could be a means to tell stories and as well as intellectual interrogation of what society is and consciousness, you
Yeah,
know.
you get to see
And then,
Zeke's kitchen
yes,
on one side. You get to see
was
him even
fantastic. Yeah,
teaching about the palm wine drinkard and conversations even
yes,
about that, and you get to see how things got
yeah.
played out.
Yeah, yes. So, and then I read other collections like Goals, Hopes, and Impediments, which I think is the masterpiece of
I
essay. I
I
think
can't
it's
remember. I can't remember the
one of the best.
particular story, but what the one that really stood out to me as a young boy then was the idea of the madman and trying to the madman that took away the clothes of this the guy, the main character in that particular
Okay.
story, and he had to run mad. He didn't run mad, but he had to run naked into the market, and then they had to say he was a madman. And he was a very, very proud person in the village, but I can't remember the particular story. But those type of memories you get to.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, I think is that not the that could perhaps be the first essay in education
Yeah,
of a
that
British
was the
protected
first essay
child.
in that particular collection.
Yes, he told a lot. Yeah, he told a lot of stories. Told a lot of stories. Then, and I particularly love the story of his mother and the way he described their sitting room. I mean, these very mundane things could be used to tell a very good story. It's made
Sure.
me very interested in becoming an essayist. So Achebe's work made me want to be very, very conscious of my surroundings. But it was at the end of the day, it was Chimamanda who was my first love because when I discovered Purple Hibiscus in 2009 in my literature class in 2009, that was the first time I considered at a passing, I considered in passing the possibility of becoming a writer, even though then I didn't really consider it very much. And this was because of how the story of Kambili was told. I mean, this was just a young girl dealing with her reticence, but in the
Yeah.
midst of her reticence, is able to express everything that she feels, you know, in the backstage. And I was a very shy person growing up as well.
And then
So
you see
these
Father Amadi.
yes, and I related to a lot of the stories that can be told in a very, very spectacular sense. So yeah, Chimamanda was my first love in a lot of ways. And her stories, reading going ahead to read Half of a Yellow Sun and Americana. I don't I don't I don't think I agree with everything that she writes or everything that she presents, which is good because it means that we are human beings. But her storytelling is top notch. Her ability to present characters and her abilities to make even mundane things look important, and her
Yeah.
ability to invoke, sustain interest and emotional catharsis to some extent is very, very profound. And the level of excellence which she exuded as a young writer set the pedestal. For me, it was like a pedestal of the kind of thing that I would, I would aspire to as a younger writer. And so yes, that is part of the influence she has had on me. Chinua Ezenwa is my friend. I call him my mentor. I call him my mentor. He was lecturing at the university when we began the Home of the Arts and Books Festival. He's one person who is very, very forthright and very, very up and doing in what he does. If I could have a fraction of that kind of up and doingness, I believe it would be very, very helpful for me. He's recent the recent direction in which his work has taken is very, very important. The fact that he is now moving towards the cultural consciousness. He's trying to explore his ancestry. It's like a renaissance that's going on in Igbo land, and it's very, very fascinating to see somebody who is being drawn to their roots artistically and trying to explore it artistically. And I am all for it. I have read some parts of the book, and I am looking forward to even reading the whole collection this
He
year.
was able
So
to, in our conversation, he was able to espouse about 400 to 500 year history in and about a very short period of time. And we also had the privilege of talking about his next collection and the collection thereafter. So, in and about the sequel to the naming, which he calls February Memories, and in and about another set of work that ordinarily is to come out of that. And you get to see the sheer profundity of what he gets to do down there, and in relation also to his father, also who ordinarily also was like the the generation after them, Achebe, and you saw the work he produced about Achebe, and I learned for the first time that he was working also on a biography of Wole Soyinka before
yes,
he
yes, before he
eventually
passed.
sadly died in and about that.
Yes.
It's
So yeah,
it, okay.
I
You
think
about
that
it?
yeah, Ezenwa Ohito did very, very important work in the literature and in the arts, which has not been talked about as it ought to. I think they and at some point we will definitely come to that. In terms of the work that we do, we will definitely write more about him.
Yeah, I've been looking at his life for like 3 years now, and uh, I have reached out to, like, I know in and about those in the university he
Yeah,
worked in Germany, and it's one of those stuff we talk about structures. You get to see emails of his colleagues, and you get to see emails of his university, and you get to see places he has been to down here. You can easily trace him in Europe. Then you can trace him in a place like Benin, where he spent he spent some time, and you can
yeah,
easily trace him down here. And thanks for how will I say, paid journals that ordinarily one way or the other one has to subscribe to get access to materials that you cannot ordinarily get. It's still a place we ordinarily have to work on. If someone dies, what do we do to get to preserve their work, and how do we go in and about that, and how should life ordinarily be looked at? Your book, Loss is an Aftertaste of Memories, have been talked
yeah,
about by a whole lot of persons. The whole idea of memories, down to the whole idea of a sense of experience. How personal was that? Writers ordinarily have been asked this question, and they try to run away from that particular question. How much of that book is you? How much of that book is Michael? And how much of that book is the situation around where you find yourself? Or it mustn't ordinarily be about Michael. How much of that book is Michael's friends, if it comes from your friends, or if it's
oh,
just purely in and about a complete work of fiction?
yeah. So loss is an aftertaste of memories. I always tell people, like you said, the question always comes up in many of my book readings, and even sometimes, I mean, I get random messages from people who are reading the book at the moment, and the question just they often throw the question. Funny enough, is in a very similar way. Are you Nosike? You are Nosike. Nosike, and I'm kind of. um, I'm kind of scared that as the book gets known and as it gets popular, one day I might be walking on the road and somebody would stop me and say, "You are Nosike. You are Nosike. Why are you Nosike?" So but then I always say that about 40% of the story in the book
Yeah.
is my personal story. But if you were to examine it from the point of who I am as a person, then it is more than
Hmm.
40%. But it is about things that happened, maybe 40%. But we call it fiction. One of the things why fiction is so profound is it helps us bring our imaginative truth with our imaginative truth and our reality together and
Yeah.
produce a work of art that, even if it is not so steeped in reality, but the truth of the work is profound and it transcends even much of what is touted as facts, you know.
Hmm.
So it was a work born from nostalgia. And yes, so yeah, nostalgia and a bit of memory of what memory can do. So I think it's a very personal work. It's a very personal work in that aspect. There's no shying away from that. But it is beyond just me writing my own story. Henry Miller at some point in his life became a bit irritated with his readers because they knew he was writing from a biographic perspective, and so everybody wanted to interview him in relation with his work, as opposed to they wanted to interview him as though they were wanting to know more about him instead of getting the message from the book.
From the
Yeah, so I want my readers to read the book and read about the book as though they were reading about Nosike, and forget about Chiedoziem for a while. Forget about the similarities between Chiedoziem and Nosike. The book has its own messages that the readers could get from it. Yeah.
Yeah, Ugochukwu Anadi points out in conversation with him, points out the idea of it not having a location, like in terms of it's a beauty in and about, you cannot really pinpoint it to a particular neighborhood. It's not like Thomas More Utopia set in a utopian England. It's like even Thomas More Utopia, someone when you read it, if you have an experience of the Irish life, you know that there's a sense of Irishness down here, or Englishness, if I should use that word down here. It's not set. You cannot really trace it to regions. Was it something you did deliberately, or is something you didn't really think about?
Yeah. So the book has a location. It is set in Benin City where I grew up.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah, but I get where you're coming from. I think what Ugochukwu was referring to was the fact that Nosike's parents were traders. They had a
Yeah,
shop. I
sure.
mean, you could even feel you could see the day-to-day activities. But for some reason, the location of the shop was
Yeah.
kind of floating. You couldn't. He told me that, okay, if we're walking along the road and we see Nosike's parents' shop, we can't point to it that this was the shop that was being talked about. And that happened. I think that happened. That was a subconscious process. It wasn't necessarily something that I set out to do, but
Okay.
but also I think the advantage is that of these kind of things in literature is that they show us that every reality, even our physical reality, is a product of our perception of it. Our perception of it is sometimes is enough to tell the whole story, and which is why sometimes a story can be set in a utopia. So I think that also there's another story, another novel which I am working on, which
Okay.
the main couple in the story, they are also traders as well. This particular story has the shop and the location of the shop fully, put together. And I think the inspiration for both Nosike's story and this other story come from the same source. So, but then I think what has happened in the former novel now gives the writer more room to be able to explore this particular location physically without thinking much about how similar it will look with the other one. So I think it's a result of serendipity, some form of serendipity in the creative process.
It's is memory a thing we should run away from, or is something we ordinarily can learn from? It's like is it something we have as an aftertaste? Because sometimes, like you rightly said in the also in the caption, you you don't really fully experience something in and about sometimes the time this particular stuff is happening. It's when you look at it from a point of retrospect, you get to come to look at the bigger picture of ordinary what was going on in your life. It's just like when you go to when you go to a GB and you ordinarily want to get to consult with your ancestors, you want to ordinarily come to experience a sense of belonging, a sense of Ibafa. You come to ordinarily see that you are in a trance, or you get to be in a trance, and you don't really come to get the full experience of ordinary what's happening to you. Is it same with memories? Is it same with conversations in and about this?
Yeah, yeah. I think the art of divination in the Igbo cosmology
Yeah.
can definitely be is definitely very similar to the art of reliving life through memories. Because in divination we tend to we seek out for hidden clues about the situation of life, about our situations in life, and these clues are ultimately serve as a compass on how to live life going forward. Soren Kierkegaard had that saying that life can only be lived forward, but it must first be understood
Backward.
backward. So now, Alpha digs into the past
Mm-hmm.
to get insights into the present on how to conduct the future.
The future. Yeah.
It's the same thing with memory. In losses and aftertaste of memories, I was kind of exploring the fact that there are certain things that happen to us, and when they happen to us, we felt certain ways about them. But then we live life and we get new memories, new perspective, new experiences, and then we remember certain things and we say, "Oh, wow, this thing happened and I felt this way about it." But now that I think about it, maybe it was not so much this way. Maybe okay, this is the way I see it now, and that gives you a new perspective. Sometimes it can be a painful realization as well, and sometimes it can even lead to bouts of epiphany, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like Nosike realizing that he used to always quarrel with his sister and he used to believe that this person is just somehow. But then remembering everything, he begins to see that there was a lot of clue all the while about the fact that he was really really loved by his sister, and he begins to examine the conflict he had with his father and how he felt about it and how he now sees it. These kind of realizations, these kind of anticlimactic realizations, to borrow from Chika Chimeze, are part of what gives us renewed wisdom and how what teaches us about memories and some things that may seem like they were not very important, but then we look at it again in fresh eyes, having lived more, and we are forced to reconsider our lives. I think changing our minds is a very important aspect of life. Anybody who cannot change their mind is not capable of growth. Life forces us to look back and to reconsider certain things. And yes, so yes, memory is an habitat. Memory is a treasure. Memory is a cove of treasure. It's a cove of wisdom. We can definitely learn a lot from memory, and we should definitely confront our memories. Sometimes our traumas are a result of unconfronted memories. We have to confront them, and we have to take what we can from them, and we have to learn what is harmful, which we are holding on from the memory. So it's all part of it.
Chika points out a particular symptomatic stuff going on in the novel as it concerns being in exile in another state and conversations in and about that. He fails exams about the current, not an exam, the current affair question asked about the the governor of the state, and he was like feeling so bad for someone as intelligent as he is. Conversations. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, conversations in and about things and in terms of relation with fathers and mothers in relation to their children. what ways do you think we ordinarily can do better? Because you've talked about your father a whole lot. You've talked about your relationship you get to share with your family, and it's something many persons get to talk about. Chimamanda talks about this so beautifully well. But also there are people just like Nosike down here who ordinarily don't really come to have a very strong memory or a strong understanding of what their ancestry looks like, especially their home state and in and about that. What are ways you think we ordinarily, as people growing up now, thinking very soon to start families and going and about this, and how cosmopolitan we are becoming? How should parents want to tackle issues of family ties, issues of tribal leanings, issues tribal leanings here in the most positive sense of the word, and in and about that. And I think of this renaissance whereby, for a very, very long period of time, our own culture and our own tradition have been branded so bad. And you see it in Nollywood, you see it in the skits we get to portray, from the creativity of someone like Denzi. You get to still see the whole idea of the uncle, nephew kind of stuff. You don't go by bench, you don't do this type of conversation. And these things might look as skit, but I have an auntie who, when I was to travel, for the first time, I was still a teenager then. When I was to travel out of the country, and she had to send me a video of ordinarily what I should do and what I shouldn't do. And it was not a video of herself; it was a video she got from Facebook, as she considered how I should conduct my life abroad. But it was born in and about of the narrative being peddled on the internet. How should parents guide their children's mind in terms of family, in terms of their culture, in terms of language, in terms of the names we give to children, right? And how strong we should be about family ties so we don't get lost completely in this
Yes.
global struggle.
Yeah. The first thing is we need to be educated in in a sense that is true. A lot of us, our understanding of what education entails is very narrow. Some of us think education is all about going to school and everything, but education is first of all, before anything, a cultural institution. You know, we've been talking about it for a very long time. The importance of bringing up children that are aware of who they are and where they are coming from. When these children have roots, we need to, we need to teach our children to speak their languages, to embrace their culture, and not to be ashamed of it. That was how I was brought up. That was how we were brought up. And part of the reason why Nosike felt that disappointment was because he felt like, I mean, these are the kind of things we talk about. The reality of who he was and where he was coming from was woven into the everyday firmament of his life. So, no, so that was moving. What was the consciousness of who Nosike was woven into his everyday life. His family goes to the village for vacations and everything. So I think that this is the fact that he felt disappointed in himself was a good thing, because ignorance is not necessarily the problem. The problem is being choosing to be ignorant. So when he racked his brain and he couldn't find it, he eventually picked it up in the current affairs book. And at the
Mhm.
end of the day, surprisingly, the examiner asked that same question as well. So we need to we need I always say that we need new philosophers, and part of the kind of philosophy we need to inculcate is that we need to become proud of ourselves. There are certain things that we can never really achieve in the world if we do not make the best use of our culture and the riches therein. So this is the parents need to let their children understand this. Even in places where we fail as a parent, you make sure that your children do not fail in that aspect. That is progressive parenting. And also, parents need to help build the self-esteem of their children, because it is when your child, okay, so it is when your child has a healthy self-esteem that they can be able to carry comfortably what they've been taught at home out into the into the society, because sometimes you go to the society and you see people not necessarily doing things the way you were taught. Now it's when you have a healthy self-esteem, you can tell yourself that no, the way I was taught can stand alongside the way another person was taught, and you know, not be swayed by peer pressure. You understand? Good education, good upbringing, and building of healthy self-esteem is very important.
It's it's been described by Chika, that's your book, as one of the best stuff out there since the the writing of Chimamanda's Popo Hibiscus, and it's not a thing to take lightly. To whom much is given, much is expected, and I can only but imagine upon the shoulders you now get to stand, and how ordinary the expectations get to get we the expectations we ordinarily are having for things that will be coming out of your own part of the world now into the future and all that. And he goes further to tell us that it's not even about looking through um, times that have been lost. Some books are in and about regrets of the past and all that, and having problems with fathers and mothers, and in and about a tyrant father or an abusive husband, and conversations like this. Every part of the book is very, very engaging. Every part of the book has something to get to say that leads to the next one, and can also take you back to get to remind yourself in and about what ordinarily can be looked at from from the back. We've looked at a whole lot of conversations. We've talked about stories and in and about that. What stories do you think Nigerian literature still needs to tell that at the moment probably we're still, like you said, Nigeria is a place where dissident voices are ordinarily not necessarily encouraged. We use a thing of irony whereby, because you look at the military era, we talked about Ezenwa Oyeto. You see them doing self-publishing in and about this periods where ordinarily their lives were at stake, and now we have almost all the freedoms we ordinarily have. Do you think this idea of we not wanting to talk about the hard stuff is in and about the concept of hard times get to bring about tough people, and then tough people bring about soft times, and then soft times bring about soft people? Or you think we're just like fella, I know one die, I know one payment, stuff like that. I won't buy house, I won't buy motor.
Yeah. So anyway, I think yeah. So I think the kind of stories we need to tell ourselves are the stories that are lying around all about us. We need to look within. Carl Jung has that saying that um, he who looks outside dreams, but he who looks within awakes. You know, we need an awakening of consciousness.
Like you said,
Um,
we need new
yeah,
philosophers.
yes, we need new philosophers. Yeah. So in my book, I think one of the themes that I explored in the book is the father-son relationship. You know, we've not had enough of that trope in contemporary Nigerian literature. We really need, you know, some of the most profound works we've had in the past uh, have had that trope. Even Things Fall Apart has a father-son trope. He has
Yeah,
in a multi-generational dimension from Okonkwo to
mo-
Unoka, and
yeah.
also from Okonkwo to his son Isaac. You
And
know,
then also you get to see the uncle when he was in exile, also
yeah,
playing the
yeah,
role of a father figure down
yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly. We really need a lot of father-son tropes in Nigerian literature, in literature from Nigeria, from Africa. Just the way the women are doing with the mother-daughter trope, that's more predominant. And we need to look at our environments. We need to look at our stories. The way the problems we suffer as a generation has to be captured in fiction. The times have to be captured in our fiction. If not, what are we going to pass on to the next generation as evidence of what happened to us? After the warrior and the fights are long gone, it is the story that remains.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need to look within, both politically, culturally, in every way. We need to look within and tell stories. there are many stories of many things that are going on about us that are being ignored, And I feel like some of the forces driving our literary arts is what will put me out there, what would make me accepted in certain spaces. But we also need to look within what story would make me fulfilled as an artist. You know, what story is the next generation going to look for? And when they look for it, which of it can I present to them? Yeah, so that's how I believe that we should. That's one kind of the kind of artistic consciousness that I think that we should aim towards.
You're a writer that lives in Nigeria. As we wrap up, what are the challenges? What are some of those challenges or rather, what do you see as the biggest challenge for young African writers today? Yourself being not just a writer, but a writer also a writer like what I would say, a writer in residence. So in and about
Yeah,
writing in and about Nigeria from Nigeria and Africa by
yeah.
extension.
The problem, the biggest problem is an institutional problem. There are no good institutions to support the writer. So the person, the Nigerian person who embarks on writing sooner or later finds himself alone, struggling with little or no support. You know, that is one of the problems that we. So the second problem is, like I said, the mentality of the not just the writers, but also some of the people who are considered gatekeepers. There's this um there's this kind of clannish kind of politics that is played in Nigerian literature, and it's elitist and it's also discriminatory. For a long time, I think Masobe book is doing a very great job. You
Sure.
know, Masobe books is doing a very great job in the publishing landscape. I credit them for having sparked a sort of revolution because they've become the kind of publishers that are capable of publishing works from writers who are unknown before, and not
Hmm.
just that, publishing the kind of works with different kind of styles, even though they seem to be gravitating more and more towards romance these days. But what they've done is something that wasn't really there in the Farafina, Parisia, Cassava.
Yeah, Cassava Republic,
Yeah,
bookcraft kind of
yeah,
era.
yes, recently we saw Yemisi Aribisala's essay, and honestly, it was a dark time for Nigerian literature, but not a lot of people know that because it was these people were not necessarily publishers. They were like a lot of them were not necessarily publishers, but people who were waiting to republish works already published in the West. And part of the thing was that there were not necessarily a lot of platforms, a lot of avenues for younger writers to come up. I think Paresia did
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
bit
yeah.
of good work. We should. I think we should always remember to give credit, even if it is the little credit where it is due. The people in
Hmm.
Paresia did, what Masobe is doing on a bigger level now. The people in Paresia did a bit of it. They brought some writers from, as well. But by and by, that has the lack of artistic the mentality or the situation that does not encourage artistic freedom has led to a lot of artistic talents fading away and not being
Hmm.
encouraged as they ought to have been. So that is the second challenge that the writer faces in Nigeria. Now, third challenge is the economic hardship. The country seems to be getting worse and worse, and survival is becoming more and more sacrosanct. So, because of that, a lot of writers abandon their artistic pursuits to seek survival at some point. So, these are some of the challenges that come to mind, and hopefully we are able to surmount them. And we really need more cultural outfits. That I think we have. When I talk about cultural outfits, I talk about cultural outfits that work in the tradition of criticism, in the critical
Hmm.
tradition. Currently, we have the Republic, Open Country Magazine, and then we have Afro Critic.
Sure.
There's also Culture Custodian. doing a bit of good work. There are many others, but I mean, in the mode of these outfits that produce constant work of criticism in all the arts, we need more of them. We need at least, if we can get five more of them, it wouldn't be too much. If we can get three more of them, and part of why it's good to have many more cultural outfits is that there becomes competition.
Mm-hmm.
More writers begin to write to the culture, and more outfits begin to market, what the magnify the voices of the writers, and there becomes more options for the writers as well to get paid, better paid for the works that they do. So yeah, we need a bit more of that, and we need more publishing houses as well to create
Sure,
content.
sure. And about publishing, you find someone like Obi now. Then we're talking about the whole idea of why he left his former publishers, in as much as price of books. While you might not want to blame the publishers completely, Obinna strongly believes that books should be kept at a particular level whereby people can
Affordable, yeah.
ordinarily get to afford. A thing that ordinarily would get to help curb a thing like piracy, right? And you see him, I think was he yesterday, he made a post about his forthcoming book, The Years of Shame, and being pegged at 7,500 naira. And while it is one of the lowest price you will get for books in recent times, you still find the problem of many persons not even being able to afford 7,500 naira. And you think it's a joke, but there are those whose salaries, when you split them by two, will not give you 7,500. You might be getting something like 5,000, or even people are still being paid 10,000 naira in a month to do some stuff down there. Do publishers, you have a publisher, Muta Books, right? Your book was published in Nigeria. What I mean published was like published within the country in terms of
Yeah,
the physical establishment that published this.
everything was done here. Everything was done here.
I don't know. I don't know. You are not a publisher, so what I might want to ask here, is it a problem of the cost of publishing materials that ordinarily make this price of these books skyrocket so much so, or you think it's something else beyond
Yeah.
beyond 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 ordinarily what people are looking at.
Yeah. So first, I want to say that I was a big part of the publication process of my book. So
Okay.
I have that experience of. So I think that the part of the reasons, there are a lot of factors why books are expensive now. Well, the first of all, when a book is being published, the editor has to be paid.
Yeah.
The person who does the layout of the book has to be paid. The person who designs the jacket of the book has to be paid. And then when the book is printed and published, there's cost of transportation, cost of shipping. These initial costs have to be covered,
Mm-hmm.
if possible, in the first 100 copies of the book that will be sold. And also, for a traditional publisher, an advance is also paid to
So the author.
the author. So when you bring these things together, these are the reasons why the initial price of the book is always at the higher side. And of course, can it be brought down a bit more than it is? Yes, it could be. But at the end of the day, it's also a perspective that I've gotten to not judge publishers for the way they put the prices of their book. And then in some cases too, some publishing houses have staff to be paid. They have staff to be paid
So
regularly.
it's not in and about just the book, a particular book being published. It's in and about the fact that there are times when they are not publishing books. They ordinarily keep the establishment going in terms of tax,
Exactly,
salaries, and stuff like that.
exactly. A lot of things are, and the books not long ago were sold 2535 at the
Yeah,
region,
yeah,
and then 2535. That was what was expensive for us at the time.
sure.
So and then when you now check the price of dollars then and the price of dollar now against how much it has increased, you find that it's not necessarily the fault of the publishers. So
Mm-hmm.
I understand what my brother Odenwe was saying, which he has a point, but also it's also important to lay the facts bare for people to see what is really going on behind the scene. So my book, for example, was sold at 6,000 when it came out. The price, the price now should be around 7 to 8,000. But the reason why, part of the reason why we were able to make it was cheaper was because some of these baggages that the not average traditional publisher has, we did not totally have them. And marketing, we hadn't begun to spend a lot of money on marketing now, which is another thing. Like, for example, Masobe Books, every 2 months or so, they send me 5 copies of books they've published, all expense paid by them. They pay me, they pay the shipping cost, and also they pay me some good money to review the books as well. So and I'm sure it's that is what it is. That's what it is. So I don't really blame what they are for Masobe Books. I don't know, maybe because I have a soft spot for what they've achieved. You get, but I think the fact that they are very up and doing, and they market. Another thing they do is that they market their books in the way other publishers do not market. Other publishers in the past did not used to seek out influencers and writers to send their books to, and even sometimes pay them. But Masobe Books do this, and it's part of why I think in order to enable them to continue to do this, their books have to be a little bit on the expensive side. I understand that totally, and it is what it is. I used to be very much critical of publishers, and I still am. I still am. But my own personal experience taught me a bit of things. But while it is important to, yes, get a bit of nuance, it's also important to begin to say, yes, is there room for improvement? Yes, there's room for improvement. Yeah, and I think that Masobe Books could also focus. They should also. I feel like the shift towards romance is good, but also they shouldn't forget that literary works. I mean, literary fiction is also very important while they do that. I would love to see more literary works and more experimental works published from their stage.
Wow, you've explored lust, you've explored history, you've explored philosophy, in and about from a different perspective one can get to look at your
Yeah,
work.
yeah,
Your next collection of Be There, you're working on a novel, like you've rightly said in the course of our conversation. What are the themes and themes you hope to explore in the works ahead? The current work you are working on, is it a family kind of stuff? Is it a father-son relationship, or is it big-time family stuff? And what are the things we should be looking out for
yeah,
in the exploration of what you want to do in the future?
yeah. In the next 2 3 novels that I am going to publish, father and son relationship is like a constant in my work. But my early fictions, because I started writing a lot of these books when I was in my early 20s, and I am rewriting them now in my late 20s.
Sure, sure,
And
sure.
my early fictions focus a lot on family life and a lot on coming of age, how family, environment, religion, friends, how they influence our behavior and what we become. Because I think one of the one of the consciousness I had at the time was that everyday story, this stories of the everyday Nigerian has to be told. We have to move a bit from the Afropolitan to the inside lives of our people. So yeah, I am very much interested in the human condition as it is shaped by family life and as that influence goes into the wider society. So yes, that is the little that I can say for now. And yes, looking back to the past as well and bringing the perspective that you now get from the past into the present is it's going to come back into the work in different ways. So yes, and yes, yeah,
Well, that this has been a very, very exciting time, my brother. I didn't expect. I always come with this sense of, okay, it's gonna be 1 hour, 1 hour, 30 minutes, and then you discover it's not like a very, very boring conversation after all. Because
yes, yes,
people sometimes ask me, why is the name this way? I'm like, these are conversations sometimes persons don't really want to have, and they prefer to do a couple of other things, and then as opposed to just sitting down and having long form conversation as it concerns things that get to affect us and all that. We'll get to talk about your book soon in complete full details. I hope to get to engage you on that particular theme when the time is right. And what I mean by that, me and you, we know what that really means. And
Yeah, yes,
I
yes.
would get to do a lengthy dive with you as it concerns that particular stuff. As we wrap up, this insightful and to a large extent very, very thought provoking with solemn, we've maintained a particular pitch throughout our conversations as such. And we've been talking to and with Michael Chiedoziem Chukwudera. We have looked into intersections of literature, history, and identity, from legacies tied to the Achebe families to the family of Ezenwa Ohe and the Adichie's family as it concerns other families also from Florawapa. We've looked at the haunting memory of Biafra and the conversation surrounding the Berlin Conference for such a small country as Belgium. You walk through the streets of Brussels or you walk through the streets of Louvain and you ask yourself, how was it that this small country ordinarily was able to capture one of the largest country in Africa? Because many persons also fail to realize that when they say there's war in Congo, it's not the entire Congo fighting. I have been to Congo. It's not the entire Congo fight. It's just one part of Congo fighting. And before you get to that part of Congo, you get to see crazy amount of vegetation. You get to see landmass not used. Nothing is happening in and about there. And it takes you hours to cross one part of the Congo to the other part. The part close to Rwanda is one part of it, and then the other part is on its own down there. And you ask yourself, how was this even possible that Berlin Conference actually happened? But it has happened. It has happened. Yeah, we've talked about
Yeah,
neocolonialism. We've talked about the need for agricultural boosting. We've talked about the need to get to support our craft, to get to support the arts, and get to see how things ordinarily are done. We've talked about publishing. We've talked about the evolving narrative about the Nigerian literature and how ordinarily things have to be done in relation to the continent. We've looked at the cost of books, and we have the market. We've looked at education. We've looked at what ordinarily must be done there, because the fear I as a person have is the fear born out of what is happening at the moment in the north. The idea that years back children were ordinarily supposed to be sent to school but they weren't, and that particular generation is even still going to cause serious stuff for us in the future, because in as
mhm,
much as every election has to happen in a place like Nigeria now, people say, oh, we've heard about the East, we've heard about the West, what is being cooked from the North? And you want to have an informed electorate to get to see that democracy is ordinarily a thing that ordinarily should be done. And as I grow older, I begin to come to see why Plato disliked democracy, because he talked about the mob not almost always knowing what they ordinarily
yes,
want.
yeah,
So anybody can just say anything and then you can just easily be moved by their caprices and stuff
yeah,
like that. Michael's reflection on grief, memory, and the profound ways in which, personal experiences, and not just personal experiences, everyday personal experiences can help influence the creative journey, have not been something many persons have really looked at, but it's something we ordinarily have to look at, because in and about our conversations here is something very, very enlightening. The very simple things that get to happen to us can be looked at from greater perspective. You can reach out to Michael for collaborations. You can reach out to him for a whole lot of stuff. Currently, the the Book and Arts Festival is organizing the next edition of the festival that's going to take place in a few months from now. They've been called out for volunteers, call out for sponsors. Sponsors, particularly, we live in a very, very tight space in Nigeria at the moment. It's a thing that is very, very important. And in the course of this conversation, Michael has talked about the fact that many persons abandon the art to fight for their stomach because you get to a particular age, you need a wife or you need a family, to put it better. You need to start a family, and you get to see that in and about this capitalistic venture capitalism, not just the normal traditional capitalism where we live in. You need money, and you need a whole lot of this stuff, so that his work, both as a writer and as an organizer of literary initiative, continues to show to a large extent how literature in Nigeria and Africa can, offer not just a reflection about what is happening, but also tools in which the future can use to navigate the complex existence we get to see here. His book has been critically acclaimed for a whole lot of stuff. And you get to see in our conversation, if you've listened up until this point, Michael's vision for the future of African literature, which he believes and which I also believe holds a whole lot of stuff. You look at Autoriezi, and you get to see the whole concept and the idea of the fact that most stuff that come out of Africa are very, very critically examined, well consensus writing, and you get to see in and about the vision a place like the Republic have and the quality they get to do down there. Thank you, Michael, for sharing your wisdom, your work, and your unwavering commitment, to the future of African literature and to the betterment of the Igbo people and the betterment of Nigeria as a whole. It's been a pleasure for me, and it's been wonderful getting to hear from you today. Thank you for putting out that call that day and said, this is my number. As like 3-4 years ago, this is my number. You can reach out and let's have a conversation. And I did. And and I've not regretted that ever since then. But even before then, I've been following your work. Because if I've not been following your work, I wouldn't have seen that call out. So it's like I've read everything you've put out there, from criticism about Onyeka Nwelu to the criticisms of Obioma Chigozie and the many works he gets to do down there. And I wish your journey be rough, but as it gets rough, you be afforded the necessary endurance needed to bond this wisdom and bring it out to the world to get to use.
The necessary resources as well to keep
The
going.
necessary resources as well. Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah.
Thank you, my brother.
You're welcome, my brother. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you some other time soon.
See you.